Good to go. Except she does roll call, so.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Architectural and Engineering Examiners is taking place in Conference Room 1A of the Davy Crockett Tower at 500 James Robinson Parkway, Nashville, Tennessee. And notice of this board meeting was posted on the board's website on June 3rd, 2014. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Susan Ballard. Here. Hal Balthrop. Wilson Borden.
Here.
Robert Campbell.
Here.
Jerome Headley.
Here.
Philip Lim. Bill Lockwood.
Here.
Rick Thompson.
Here.
Frank Wagster.
Here.
Ricky Bursay.
Here.
Laura Reinbold.
Here.
Stephen King.
Here.
You have a form.
Thank you very
Quorum.
much.
What was that?
Said form, I didn't say.
I'd like to acknowledge the guest. If y'all just stand and give your name, if you would, please.
Candy Toller of 2 Engineering Association.
It's contagious.
Thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll get to you as the agenda allows. Any announcements? Seeing none. New agenda for changes and/or additions. So we're going to proceed on with the agenda. Consent agenda, John?
On page
Page
30.
32.
32, yes, you have the minutes from the April 2014 board meeting for your review and approval.
I have any changes or comments, or do I have a motion?
Typo was pointed out to me, I'll get that corrected.
I make a motion we approve
As
with the
Second.
typo, excuse me, with the typo correction.
have a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Passes. Staff complaints?
That's on page 44. These are all complaints in which the respondent was disciplined in another jurisdiction. The disciplinary action was less than a suspension or revocation, and in accordance with board policy, we issued a letter of caution and recommend closure. And you can vote on these as a group.
Comments? Any discussion? Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to accept staff's recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendation. Please all say in favor.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, that passes. Professional society reports. Candy, since you're close?
Closer.
Closer.
Yeah.
I noticed that there's authorized guest wireless available. Are we authorized guests?
I've been informed that we don't have access to that
Okay,
system. Yeah.
I was dreaming. Okay. Thank you. I'm Candy Toller with the Tennessee Society of Professional Engineers and the American Council of Engineering Company. And I would like to remind the engineers of this group and the architects, interior designers, and the public member that we are having our annual meeting on September 25th and 26th, and we'd be delighted to have all of you here. I am hoping that I'm going to have at least two engineers speaking on the 26th in the afternoon, Mr. Campbell. I hope you have it on your calendar.
Oh, Mr. Balthrop was doing that, but whatever I need to do.
Well, I would hope that you would be coming to that meeting anyway,
Make fun of Hal at that meeting?
if we need to.
Well, then I'll be there.
Okay, okay. And you just got our most recent newsletter. I hope you found the May newsletter interesting. We had a history of TDOT in there. Now, I know you don't do, most of you don't do transportation engineering, but it was interesting to think about the department being 100 years old in July. You read that, right, Rick?
I have that letter, though.
You have it, and now that I've
Now
piqued
I'll
your
read it.
interest, yeah, it was just an interesting story that Luann Grandinetti did for us. And that's really all I have to report, except that I am retiring as of April 30th, 2015. So through the legislative session next year. And hopefully my successor will be able to work with me for February and March, maybe January, February, and March through the legislative session. So it's now official. But don't try to get rid of me before then.
We may make a motion that we don't accept that.
I don't think you actually accept my report.
Oh, well, okay.
I just report. But thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. Any other questions, observations? It's a short report because the
Thank you.
legislature's gone home, but we're dealing with elections now.
Yeah.
And half the members of the Senate are running for reelection, and all of the members of the House are running. And actually, one of our engineers had a fundraiser for Charles Sargent, the chair of the House Finance Committee, earlier this week, excuse me, and I understand it went over really well. And he had lots of good attendance and raised a lot of money for Charles. Thank you.
Good morning, Ashley Cates. I'm with the American Institute of Architects, the Tennessee chapter. My report's pretty short too. Session's out. I know we'll be gearing back up again, the Government Relations Committee, to start looking at next session and any type of legislation that we are interested in introducing. So I will keep you posted on that. The Government Relations Committee had a break. We usually meet every Friday on a conference call. Started that this year, so it went pretty well to be able to monitor the legislation. And Trey Wheeler's the chair of the Government Relations Committee. Our annual business meeting is coming up for convention. Our convention's going to be held at the Music City Center this year again, one more time before we go somewhere else. The convention starts July 30th. And concludes on August 1st. We'll have our annual business meeting the morning of August 1st. So we have a great group of designers coming in. We actually have a landscape architect as well, Susanna Drake. So everybody's excited about it. You can go to our website, aiatn.org, for more information. We hope to see you there. Also, wanted to let you know that we are proposing just some small changes to the AIA Tennessee bylaws, just getting it up to speed as far as the requirements for notification. Instead of sending everything by snail mail, we're adding in electronic communication and including some AIA national bylaws that are required. Anytime you update your bylaws, you have to include the national bylaws, and that would include conflict of interest and whistleblower clauses. It's nothing major, but that will be sent out to our members 30 days prior to the annual business meeting, probably more than 30 days prior. The board just approved those changes to send to the membership. About it. Thank you.
Morning. I'm Nathan Ridley. I represent the Tennessee chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. I'm better prepared this time, Mr. Chairman. From here in Nashville, our annual meeting will be in September of this year. It's going to be in Chattanooga this time. I'm excited about that. Y'all get some more details about that in the not too distant future. Sensitive in the legislative arena, the budget process is always ongoing, and we got another monthly report of revenues, and they were not good. And that doesn't really, it's not something I want you to lose any sleep over, but sometimes when the budget goes south, our friends in F&A go looking in other places for money, and some of the wiser more experienced members of the board remember that they'll steal your reserve sometimes if you're not steal, make use of your reserve if you're not careful. So we'd like for people to come to Tennessee and spend a lot of money, but the sales tax is not the issue. It's franchise and excise tax, and smart people are scratching their head over that one about why those numbers are not as good as they should be. As Candy mentioned, elections are upon us. With Tennessee being all red all the time, sometimes the more important elections are the primary elections, and y'all know those are on Thursday, August the 7th. So I would encourage in your shops to build a culture of civic engagement. You want everybody at your shop to go vote. You know how folks, they talk about law offices, that's a good place to work, or maybe that's not a good place to work, and everybody kind of nods and you know what that means. Part of it being a good place to work is having a culture of civic engagement, because people don't go vote. Every time I go speak to, I ask, did you go vote in the last election? Everybody raises their hand, and somebody is lying to me out there, because I know everybody doesn't go vote. Because we just had an election here in Nashville in May, and we didn't hit 10% on the turnout. And August will be a little better, but people, they pay attention to the presidential elections, and that'll drive turnout a little bit. But you want to build that culture of civic engagement, so encourage your folks to go vote. You got 20 days of early voting, so there's no real excuse. We've made it pretty easy to do that. But no, our little group's doing pretty well. We got some national recognition for getting our numbers up. Our chapter's growing, and we've been encouraged over that for the past 3 or 4 years, and that's because of our executive director, Kate Horton from Memphis. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Don?
Good morning, and for the record, I'm Don Baltimore, representing the Tennessee Interior Design Coalition, and my report will be very short this morning. I'll just second everything that's been said by the others about getting involved in the elections. What the interior design community is doing now that the legislature has adjourned is pretty much just session, and where we go in that, there will be in Nashville in next month a post-Neocon meeting, which Neocon is, I guess most of you know, the new furniture and design trends, architectural, et cetera, out of Chicago, and this we'll be looking at those trends after those that went to Neocon return, and then our associations will be having annual meetings throughout summer and early fall, and then we'll get back to concentrating on legislation. But as of now, we push, and we'll just see what happens, and we're willing to work with the board to try and maintain your reserves, and certainly so hope that
So now I guess we'll go to, the Sunshine Law presentation.
All right. Chairman Lockwood and members, thank you all for having me this morning. As I said, for the record, my name is Damon Romano. I'm a paralegal currently with the department. I'm a recent graduate of Belmont Law School, and I'll hope to be taking the bar exam in July. Excuse me. We're here this morning to give you a presentation. I hope it won't take longer than about 30 or 35 minutes of your time. It's a legal presentation. I have just graduated from law school, but I am not yet a licensed attorney, and so I will tell you that I have come after 3 years to loathe legalese as much as many of you all probably do. So I'm going to try to avoid it as much as I reasonably can. There are a couple of laws that I want to share with you this morning, though, and just one or two legal cases that are really important that I'll tell the story of as we go forward. When we talk about the Sunshine Laws, we're really talking about two laws in the state of Tennessee. We're talking about the Open Records Act, and then we're talking about the Public Meetings Act. Excuse me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time this morning on the Open Records Act. That's something that your executive director and his staff will take care of on a day-to-day basis as a matter of course. But I will talk about it briefly so that we can so that you can kind of get a peek behind the curtain and see what they're doing for you on a day-to-day basis. Open Records Act. When we talk about the Open Records Act, we're talking primarily for your purposes about information requests that are made by the public. Anything that you all do that you are required to keep as a record, which is pretty much everything, is liable to be requested by the public. They can make a Freedom of Information Act request, you may have heard of that, or just a simple public records request. The presumption in the law is that we're going to grant those requests, okay? And then there are some exceptions that we make to say, well, no, these things need to be held confidential. So when we talk about then what, excuse me, what is liable to be requested, it is all documents, papers, letters, maps, books, photographs, microfilms, electronic data processing, files, and output, films, sound recordings, or other material, if that doesn't make it clear, regardless of physical form or characteristics. So when I say everything is liable to be requested, it really means everything. Now, it doesn't mean that the request is necessarily going to be granted to have that record released to the public. Excuse me. But it's pretty darn well everything that can be looked into. Okay. And that's pretty much all we're going to say this morning about public records. As I mentioned, on a day-to-day basis, that's something that your executive director will take care of. And if you have further questions about that, he's a good person to address. So we'll move then into the Public Meetings Act, where we're going to spend most of our time this morning. We'll talk about what the Public Meetings Act is broadly, what a meeting is for the purposes of the law, and what it's not. What you're required to do, both as a board commission in your plenary capacity and as individual members. We'll talk about, excuse me, notice, agenda, public presence, minutes. We'll find, folks, that once we figure out what notice is there, and once we figure out what a meeting is and what it's not, we will have covered about 95% of what you all need to know as members in order to do your job. And then briefly at the end, we'll talk about what happens if you violate the Sunshine Law. What happens if you go behind those closed doors and carry on substantive debate about your issues or your business outside of the public forum, off the record. We'll talk briefly about the idea that it's nullity. It's a simple word. It means that the court, if you get sued over it, is going to go back in time, and they're going to go back to that point in time at which the violative act occurred, at which you all did something you weren't supposed to do, and we're going to pretend as though it never happened. And that doesn't sound like too much on its own, but we'll see that that can have fairly disastrous consequences as it rolls downhill. Excuse me, and we'll look at that, hopefully without making it too heavy this morning. All right, let's dig into it then. The General Assembly hereby declares it to be the policy of this state that the formation of public policy and decisions is public business and shall not be conducted in secret. That's our foundation that everything else is built on. Public policy, for your purposes, is going to be your rules and regulations. Statute, of course, that governs you is handled by the legislature. Anytime you amend a rule, make a new rule, delete an old rule, that's public policy. Decisions, then, is everything else. Issuance of a license, revocation, suspension, discipline against a license, adopting new policies, ruling on contested case hearings, that's all decisions. This next part, then, excuse me, is the free speech clause of the Tennessee State Constitution. And what it's telling you is that, look, you have volunteered to serve in this capacity. You volunteered to serve on this board. But that does not infringe your rights as citizens of the state to free speech. What it is telling you is that whatever you choose to say in your capacity as a member of the board ought to be on the record. Excuse me. And you ought to be prepared for that when you speak. The act is remedial in nature, which is a fancy way of saying we can't fix a problem, folks, until a problem arises. It should therefore be construed broadly to promote openness in government and to protect the public against closed-door meetings. Excuse me. And so here we are. Every time we see the courts and the legislature speak about this, they're going to be doing so in this very broad, very expansive language. Their intent is to leave no loopholes. And you can see it here. All meetings of any governing body are declared to be public meetings open to the public at all times, except as provided by the Constitution. That except there at the end is what we call the executive session. And we'll talk about that more in detail in a few minutes. By the way, 2 slides ago, the law told you that your meetings, that your policies and your decisions were public business. This is the one that's telling you that your meetings are also public business. It applies to all regulatory boards and commissions of the Department of Commerce and Insurance, definitely includes us here this morning. It applies to all governing bodies. And we say, well, a governing body is just the members of a public body that has 2 or more members with the authority to make decisions or recommendations and so forth. Well, wait a minute. If a governing body is just part of or a kind of a public body, well, then what's a public body? Haven't we just moved the problem back one step? What they're trying to tell you here, excuse me, is that we're going to pick up our subcommittee meetings and our committee meetings as well. So you had a board in the past that would say, okay, we understand that when we get together as the whole board, the plenary board, that we're required to have that on the record and under the gavel and properly noticed and so on. But when we go into our committee meetings and our subcommittee meetings, we're allowed to do that behind closed doors. No. So that's what we're trying to pick up here. Excuse me. What's a meeting? It applies to the Private Probation Services Council, to the Motor Vehicle Commission, to the Architects and Engineers Commission, to every one of these commissions, about 24 of them, excuse me, that are housed within the department and that have their meetings in this room and next door and so on. So a meeting is the convening of the governing body that you need a quorum for, and that's required to make any decision, any substantive decision. And so again, we see that our subcommittee meetings are picked up. Let's talk about what's not a meeting. A meeting doesn't include any on-site inspection. Okay, so for example, we have the Motor Vehicle Commission, and as a regular part of their business, the Motor Vehicle Commission will send out staff, inspectors or investigators out to car lots, out to dealerships, out to places where they sell mobile homes, perhaps, and say, okay, let us check your logs, let us check your temporary tags, so on and so forth. That's not a meeting. If we have the Blasting Commission, for example, and they send out state arson investigators to make sure that explosive blasting goes on according to the specs and the rules, that's not a meeting. And you can see how that would get unwieldy very quickly if we did it that way. Excuse me. This is really kind of the heart of it, and this is what has sort of generated some, I'll say, contention, to put it nicely. What's not a meeting? A meeting is not the chance meeting of 2 or more members of a public body. So if one of you runs into the other one of you at the Piggly Wiggly and bumps shoulders at the gas station, that's not a meeting. Okay, and nobody can then sue you over that, or if they did, it wouldn't get very far, and say, well, you're conducting public business off the record. It's a chance meeting. Okay, and we'll say more about chance meetings a little bit later. Excuse me. However, no such informal assemblages can be used to decide or deliberate public business. This is our spirit of the law clause. We'll talk about 4 Ds, and I didn't come up with it, I just happened to notice it. Decide, deliberate, later we'll see debate, and the last one is discuss. This is an excerpt from an opinion of the Tennessee Attorney General. 2 or more members of a public body can share a meal together in which public business is discussed. But such discussion should not constitute deliberations. Are you confused? It confuses me. And folks, I'll tell you, if you can accurately determine 4 or 5 or 6 months ahead of time what some judge is going to say about whether or not y'all talking over lunch about board business is only discussion or whether it rises to the level of a prohibited deliberation, you're smarter than I am, which is probably the case anyway, but for different reasons. You see what I'm saying, though? It's a very fine line. And I'm not aware that anybody has a really good grasp on where that is. And so part of why I'm here this morning is to serve as sort of a cautionary role. I've been shopping this presentation or a version of it around to all of the boards and commissions, as I said, about 24 of them, within the department over the last 6 or 8 months. And you all are the second to last. So, but the idea then is to clear away any cobwebs. For some of the new members, they've never had this information presented formally in a sort of instructional format to them. And then for those of you who've been on the board or served as a commission member for X number of years, you may not have seen it in a half a dozen years or ever in any formal kind of a capacity. And so part of the reason that I'm here this morning is to help kind of clear away any cobwebs, make sure as a department that we're all on the same page and have a good, clean understanding of current law. Excuse me. So I said deliberation, debate, and decision are the 3 things you can't do unless you are in a public meeting properly noticed on the record under the gavel. Oh, but you can discuss. And again, I think it's a razor's edge and for safety's sake ought to be stepped back from. What's not a meeting? We know that lunch breaks, restroom breaks, smoke breaks, recesses between a morning or afternoon session, or recesses between a multi-day session. If you adjourn at 4:30 or 5 o'clock on a Thursday night and then come back at 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning, that's not, thank you. Boss's boss brings me water. It's a good day. So those are all times when council business or commission business ought not to be discussed. Regular meetings, such as today's, also any special meetings, all count as meetings for the purposes of the law, and they are all included. As I mentioned, the only exception is that executive session. By the way, emergency meetings, we've had boards or commissions, I don't know if it's something that comes up a lot for y'all, but we've had boards or commissions have to say, look, we've got a licensee who's a bad actor, who's a flagrantly bad actor, and we only regularly meet once a quarter. We cannot wait until the next regular meeting in order to take action on this because there's much risk of continuing harm to the public, and so we're going to call an emergency meeting. You may notice that a lot of times those emergency meetings are scheduled 2 or 3 weeks out because they're subject to the Public Meetings Act, and so they still have to be properly noticed, and you have to allow enough time for the public notice. Excuse me. All right. I mentioned executive sessions a couple of times, so let's talk about that. Executive sessions occur when one or more of you, so it can be an individual member, meets with your attorney, Mr. Herndon, and you're under lawsuit or you've been threatened with a lawsuit, and you are asking Rob questions related to that suit or potential suit. So you take discipline or impose discipline against somebody's license, and then you break for lunch, and that person comes up to you in the hallway and says, I don't much care for how you ruled, I'm going to sue you. That is perfect fodder for an executive session meeting. During that executive session, then, you are entirely within your rights to go off the record, in private, behind closed doors, however you want to say it, with your attorney. ask his sound legal advice as to what the legal consequences would be of such and such an action versus such and such another action, and so on and so forth. Okay? But you cannot discuss board business during that time. You cannot. So if you go back into your executive session and you say, we've been sued, we're about to be sued, what does this mean for us as a board or commission? What are the consequences that flow down to us? Could it affect our budget? So on and so forth. You can ask Mr. Herndon those questions. As soon as you get to that sort of inter-commissioner, inter-board member crosstalk where you say, well, based on the advice he's just given us, I think we should do X and so. Stop. That's where you are now offering your opinion, you're deliberating, as to how you might vote if it comes up for a vote. Okay? And so that falls into the realm of business potentially before the board or the commission, and that's when we have to stop, take a step back, get back into the committee room, under the gavel, on the record, and have those deliberations and debates for the record. Excuse me. And by the way, it's part of Rob's job to stop you if you're in that executive session and you start going too far afield, to say, folks, I think we're getting into kind of forbidden territory here. Let's back off and get back on the record. So there's some balancing there. How far does it go? Here you have the Maury County Civil Service Commission, and what they were doing was first round job interviews. And so they would do all these job interviews, and then they would go into a meeting of the Civil Service Commission, and they would talk about the people they interviewed. And they would vet people, and then the vetted people would go onto a vetted people list, and then that list would be sent over to the county sheriff's department. And from that list, they would hire support staff, sheriffs, deputies, things like that. Tennessee Attorney General says that meeting where they're talking about the results of their job interviews is very likely to be subject to the Public Meetings Act and job interviews. And yet we're saying that those need to be, the discussions about the job interviews need to be on the record, publicly noticed, and so on and so on. And if you think about it, you think, well, okay, it's not terribly efficient, but it makes sense. The people hired from off of that list are going to have a profound impact on public safety. And so we're going to say the public has a right to know how those decisions are made. Let me speak briefly about electronic communications. If one of you emails Chairman Lockwood and says, here's a news article related to our two professions, great, fine. That's a perfectly legitimate discussion. If you say, this is an issue that has come up in the newspapers, for example, or that I've become aware of, and I think it's important and I want to talk about it, can I please have it included on the next agenda? Sure, fine. But if you say, here is a damning news article about one of our licensees, and I think based on what I've seen here, we've got to take action. Now again, you're offering your opinion as to how you might vote if it comes up for discussion or deliberation. Excuse me. And that's something, again, where we can't do that off the record. We've got to get under the gavel. Electronic communications between yourselves and your board attorney, Mr. Herndon. I have a question about the legal consequences of something the council has done. I didn't want to go into it at the meeting. I felt like it would be a distraction from the agenda, whatever it happens to be. But it's really bothering me, and so I want to ask you questions. I mentioned a moment ago that the executive session says you can, in your individual capacities as members, go speak behind closed doors with your board attorney, with Mr. Herndon, and get his sound legal counsel excuse me, regarding those issues. And be your attorney in your individual capacity as a member of this board. But he is not your personal attorney. So if, for example, one of you goes out to speak to a trade group or a high school during career fair day, and you don't have the blessing of the whole board to do it, that might be a problem. And so you'd be well within your rights then to go to Mr. Herndon and say, what do I do about this? If, on the other hand, you get picked up for your 19th DUI in 15 days, he's probably not going to be able to help you, and at that point, that's your personal issue, and you need to go seek your own attorney for that. Electronic communications between members. I mentioned a moment ago that there are some communications that are perfectly fine, perfectly innocent. If one of you emails another of you and says, I heard y'all were caught in that ice storm a few months ago, and are you okay? Is there anything we can do for you? Or I saw your granddaughter in the school play, or what have you, last week, and gosh, wasn't she cute? That's all fine. You can't, of course, discuss board business. However, what if somebody goes digging into it, what are they going to see first? Before they see that the content of those emails or faxes or text messages is perfectly innocent, the first thing they're going to see is you've got two members of this board or commission that are talking to one another off the record. And it raises this huge appearance of impropriety. It's a big giant red flag. And so again, for safety's sake, folks, I am not here this morning to beat you to death or to tell you what you can and can't do. What I am here to do is explain the sort of consequences that may flow down if you choose to act in a certain way. And so my recommendation is going to be that all of that sort of interpersonal crosstalk ought to be just blanket avoided. Safety's sake. Because it's better, in my opinion, that there be nothing there that you have to explain, rather than having to be subpoenaed and deposed and so on and so forth to explain something. And it may come out perfectly innocent. One of the sort of touchstones of my presentation this morning, folks, is that if you get sued, you've already lost. And I pause deliberately to let that sink in for a minute. Even if you win, even if the attorney comes in and successfully defends you, if you get accused of a violation of this Sunshine Law, this Public Meetings Act, you've already lost. The massive sinkhole in time, money, your energy, your staff's time and energy is huge, and you can't ever get it back. And it can really, I've seen it happen, folks, and it can really put a hard stop on your ability to do the business that you've been mandated to do. Excuse me. And so again, for safety's sake, ought to be avoided. All right. Let's talk about electronic attendance. What if one or more of you can't be here in person? You've probably dealt with this before. That absent person can be included telephonically, and their voice gets piped in over the PA, and they can be on the record, and that's all fine. However, we do have to drop back to roll call votes. We can't do any of this all in favor, say aye business anymore. Why? Again, the Sunshine Laws tell us that the public has a right to know who's voting how. And if you're all sitting up here with your shining, smiling faces, that's fine, because the public can come and see who votes how. But if one or more of you is not physically here, that's why we're going to drop back to that roll call vote for everything that we do. Quorum. If you have enough people here to make a quorum, then the rest of you can participate telephonically or electronically, and that's fine. What if you don't have enough people here to make a quorum? Can you still move forward? And the answer is yes. If the only way you get to a quorum is by including people on the telephone, you can still go forward with your meeting. What you would need to do then, and typically the chair or the acting chair would adopt what's called a statement of necessity. It's not anything formal, it need not even be written, but it does have to be on the record somewhere. And so typically you're just going to speak clearly into the microphone and say, look, we understand that we're required to have a forum. I'm doing it too. We understand that we're required to have a quorum in order to move forward with our meeting. However, we also have a mandate from the public and from the one who appointed us to this post to conduct this business in a timely manner, to get through this agenda today. And so, by necessity, we're going to move forward understanding that we get to a quorum only by including the people that are not physically present in the room. Once you've made that statement, you're covered, because you've gone on the record and you've said why we're doing what we're doing, and that's all. Act is to be construed most favorably to the public. It is all-encompassing. It applies to every meeting, except where the statute on its face excludes its application. That exclusion doesn't apply to you. I could explain it further. It would take another 45 minutes. It has to do with those who have the legal authority to commit the state treasury to certain actions. And since you all don't have your fingers in the state treasury, the state has its fingers. That doesn't apply. So as far as you all are concerned this morning, it is to be construed most favorably. And again, we see that very broad, very all-encompassing, very inclusive language. The legislature is intending to leave you no loopholes. And this is a case, one of the cases that I wanted to talk to you about this morning. It's kind of a sad case. The Shelby County Commission had one of its longstanding members pass away in office. Very well regarded, very well respected, had served for a long time, and served a strongly minority section of the county. And it was thought that morally, we really have an obligation to make sure that it is somebody from that strongly minority district that represents that district or that section of town. Look at amongst themselves to communicate amongst themselves off the record in a series of phone calls to say, we've got to make this happen. It's just the right thing to do. And so they came up with a short list, and then they narrowed that short list down to one person, and they called that one person and they said, if you were appointed, would you serve? Because it's the commission that has the legal authority and mandate to appoint somebody to fill out the remainder of that gentleman's term, and then the regular elections would pick back up from there. Called them, they said, if we appointed you, would you serve? And he said, I'd be happy to, I'd be honored. And so you get to the next meeting of the Shelby County Commission. The chairman starts the meeting by saying words to the effect of, we're very sorry about this gentleman's passing, our condolences to his family, so on and so forth. We have to fill his seat. Are there any nominations? One name was nominated. Is there any debate? No debate. All in favor say aye. Unanimous. The gentleman is sworn in, takes his seat, and begins to act as a Shelby County Commissioner. And somebody in the gallery said, well, that doesn't pass the smell test. That's not right. One name, no other candidates, no debate. Come on. Something stinks. And so they sued. And sure enough, it came down, and you can see there in the fine print at the bottom, it went all the way up to the Tennessee Court of Appeals for the Western Section, meaning that they did that dance at least once and possibly twice before. So they're on their second or third go-round by the time the decision finally comes down. Remember I said before that once you get sued, you've already lost? Here they've lost 3 times. It's expensive. And it's very sad. And of course, the court came back and said this is the textbook definition of a violation of the Sunshine Law. Meeting behind closed doors, the fix was in on this guy from the start. And even with the best of intentions, the court was required to rule, to find nullity, as though it never happened. Now, the court's definition of speedy is different from normal people's definition of speedy, okay? And so by the time they got to this gentleman had been sitting and serving for months and months. And it was all done away with. And you think, okay, well, that's sad. The gentleman was kicked off and they have to redo the election. That's a pain in the neck, but really what's the big deal? Okay, every subcommittee that he chaired, those decisions, gone. Every committee meeting in which he cast the deciding vote, those decisions, gone. And it puts a cloud, at a minimum, raises a red flag over every other piece of business that he did or participated in. And the short version is, and this, I promise, is the short version, is that the business of the Shelby County Commission, folks, Shelby County's not a small place, came to a grinding halt. Was basically rewound in time for, I think it was 6 to 8 months if I recall correctly, and we'll start the clock there again. And so for something on the order of a year and a half or 2 years, very little got done, and it was just madness, chaos. Right? And so again, with the best of intentions, violation of this sunshine law can have disastrous effects. Nullity is such a short word, but it is loaded with meaning. That's kind of heavy. So let me lighten up a little bit. The public has a right to attend and observe your meetings, but not the right to participate. You can let people speak if you want to, whether it be a group of licensees. You can invite people to speak as you did this morning, but you're not required to let anybody, any member of the public, speak at your meetings. Why? Again, you have business to do that's mandated by the state and by the authority that appointed you. So, excuse me, you can say, okay, this is an important issue. We want to open it up to our licensees to speak, but we've got an agenda to get through today, so we're going to limit it to 30 minutes, let's say. Or any individual speaker can only speak for 60 seconds. Any of that is fine. As long as you treat everybody the same, you're covered. Notice, I mentioned before that once we figured out what a meeting is and what a meeting is not, once we figure out meetings and notice, we've covered about 95% or effectively all of what you need to worry about on a day-to-day basis, and the details then can be filled in by your board attorney or your executive director. Notice requires 3 things: location, contents, and timing. The contents of the notice have to reasonably describe the purpose of the meeting and the proposed action to be taken. The sort of conventional form for that is our agenda. We don't have to use an agenda, we've chosen to, and that's reasonable and fine. Some boards or commissions think that you are chained to your agenda, that the agenda is like Charlton Heston standing on top of the papier-mâché mountain with the 10 Commandments, and that they're carved in stone and that they shall never be altered in the slightest iota. Not so. Reasonably described. Okay? And we can see that at the end of every agenda is the item new business. Nobody knows what that's going to be before it comes up. And so, guideline, but you're not tied to it. The idea being that if a member of the public, a licensee or anybody, decides that there is an item about which they are particularly interested, and they see the agenda, and they say to themselves, aha, if I show up for this meeting on this day, the thing that I care about is going to be talked about in some capacity sometime while I'm there. That's reasonably described. That's kind of your test, okay? But you're not chained to it. You can alter times, modify the agenda to move one thing earlier, move another thing later, so on and so forth, and that's fine. Location of the notice. If you have the greatest notice in the world, or I'm sorry, timing. If you post the best notice in the world 20 minutes before the beginning of the meeting, what good does that do anybody? Nobody can find out about it. And so we're going to say you have to post it in adequate time and sufficient time for the public to become aware of it. Typically, the courts are going to say your rule of thumb there is 7 to 10 days. If you post your notice a week to a week and a half in advance of the actual meeting, you're probably going to be covered, and if you get sued over it, it's going to pass muster in the courts. As a matter of fact, and I think this is right, John, that all of their meetings are posted, what, a year in advance on their website?
Calendar, the meeting dates,
the calendar.
not the agenda.
No, not the agenda, but
Right.
the notice that there's going to be
Yeah.
a meeting on that day and time.
They are.
A year ahead of time. So you're covered. Location. If you have the best notice in the world and you publish it 2 years ahead of time, and the only place you publish it is in the basement, next to the boiler room, what good does that do anybody? So you've got to publish the notice in a place to where people can actually find it and read it and then show up. It used to be the phrase was newspaper of general circulation, or newspaper of wide or broad publication. Those were kind of your key phrases. At the state level, we don't use that anymore because we have the internet, which is the widest possible circulation and publication of anything we've yet invented. Okay, and you'll find, as I mentioned, that all of your meetings are posted on your own website for the commission and also on the Department of Commerce and Insurance's website. And my understanding is that there is an email blast system that members of the public can now sign up for that will shoot them out a text or an email that says, hey, there's this meeting coming up with this board or this commission that you told us you care about. Pretty cool. That newspaper of wide circulation, by the way, that is still in use, but it's mostly down at the county or municipal level when they're doing things like seizures, auctions of seized property, things of that nature. Here again, we have an opinion of the Tennessee Attorney General that tells us that our usual practice is to post it on the websites, and that's fine. So we're covered there. It hasn't been tested in court. The reason we say newspaper of general circulation or wide publication, or the internet, which we understand as a very wide publication, is because we don't want state agencies or county commissions or local cities publishing notice of some important meeting in the Costco flyer and saying, well, we published it. No, you've got to get it out to people. So whether public notice is good enough is everything. You've got to do all three: timing, contents, and location. You can't say, well, we put it in the New York Times for 5, therefore it can be a blank page. No, you've got to do everything. I talked before about the idea that the legal effect is nullity. I told you the sad story of the Shelby County Commissioner's case. There is a practical impact. As I mentioned before, once you get sued, you've lost. It's a giant black hole into which you can pour your budget, potentially, your staff's time and energy to write up all the documents or go back and re-find all of the documents that people are going to want to see when they sue you. So it's best to be scrupulously on the button about this public meeting stuff so that that doesn't happen to you in the first place. As I said, it absolutely applies to you in your individual capacities, also in your plenary or total capacity as a board. Excuse me. All of the meetings are covered by the Act. That includes regular meetings, special meetings, emergency meetings. It definitely includes our committee and subcommittee meetings. This is the other case that I wanted to briefly mention to you. There was the town of Kingston Springs, and it's out a ways. And Kingston Springs wanted to annex some of the surrounding county land. And so eventually it worked out that the whole town council of Kingston Springs did the final up or down vote on whether to annex, yes or no, in public, properly noticed, on the record, and so on and so forth. However, when they were drawing the lines and deciding exactly which parcels to annex, they did that behind closed doors in a committee meeting off the record. And of course, somebody got annexed and they didn't know they were going to get annexed, and so they were justifiably upset about now being subject to city taxes, and they sued. And the court said there was absolutely a violation when they made their decisions about who and what to annex behind closed doors. The court goes on to say they fixed that violation when they took the final up or down vote in a properly noticed public meeting. So you say, well, they got away with it. Well, they kind of didn't, because even though they were ultimately exonerated and were found not guilty or didn't pay any, they did that dance for about 2.5, 3 years in the court system. They finally figured it out before, again, the Tennessee Court of Appeals comes down and says, well, there was a violation, but they fixed the violation, so they're fine. Yeah, they're fine, but what did they have to go through to get there? Talked about the exception being your executive session, which is your opportunity to consult with Mr. Herndon about any legal questions that you may have. And by the way, that's designed, if I haven't made that clear, to be a pretty broad sort of a probrium for you all. If you're being sued, if you're potentially being sued, and that potentially, the courts have said is pretty broad. If you think you might be sued, you can always have access to your attorney to ask him questions related to that. Question comes up at a prior board meeting. What if we meet in secret, off the books, off the record, and maybe we talk about some commission business, and maybe it's substantive conversation? What if we then come back on the record and repeat that conversation, repeat that discussion, essentially verbatim for the record? Is that a violation of the Sunshine Law? The gentleman asking the question said, I can't see how it would be a violation because we've done everything on the record, right? Wrong. The court's going to say not only is that a violation of the Sunshine Law, now it's fraud on the public because you're trying to cover it up by coming in and redoing it. The real discussion where you actually made your decisions was all off the books, off the record. And that's, the courts are going to come back and say, and they did in this one case in 1996, come back and say, no, that the fix is in and you can't do that. If you have a record, or if you have a meeting off the record, and then you come back and repeat it on the record, does that fix it? Only if there is what the court will say substantially new or substantial or deliberation. Excuse me. So there has to be something more to it. You can't just verbatim quote yourself and then be okay. The best way to protect yourself and the decisions you make, as I said, is to be absolutely scrupulous. If there's any doubt in your mind as to whether a member of the public might object to something that you want to say behind closed doors, then the likelihood is high that somebody is going to object if you say something to each other behind closed doors. And that's when we get into trouble. But that is the end of my presentation today. Folks, my purpose in being here before you this morning is not to waggle my finger or for the legal department collectively to waggle its finger at you. And it's not to put the fear of God in you, but to let you know that these things are out there and to give you some idea of how the courts in Tennessee have generally and consistently ruled on these things and how the Tennessee legislature, I guess they're in that direction, how they have felt about these things. And how they feel, to be clear, is that they understand economy, efficiency. They've put all of this business before you. They've delegated it to you. And they understand that they want you to get through it in a relatively alacritous fashion. But consistently across the board, the legislature and the courts have said efficiency takes a back seat to being scrupulously above board on this Sunshine Law stuff. And that's why we have it. Because ultimately, it's about accountability. If the people elect a governor and they don't like the governor, they can vote him out of office. You all haven't been elected. And so these Sunshine Laws are here to give the public a neck that they can put their hands around and shake vigorously if they have to, if they don't like the way that you're going about their business. And that's why we're here. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this point. If you're sick of me, I'll just go away. And then once I've gone, if any of this comes up, of course, John and Rob are there to pick all that up as well. Folks, thank you for your time.
You got any questions? Laura?
Thank you, first of all. Mr. Romano, appreciate it. The executive session, I understand the parameters and the purpose and that the content is protected, but is the fact that it occurred, does that have to be announced, or is it completely protected?
The fact that you had, I will tell you that is that particular point, I've looked into that, has not been definitively decided by the courts, and it hasn't been spoken to by the legislature. My opinion, having looked into it, is that you ought to go ahead and put the fact that it occurred on the record, because that itself will tend to deflect questions and that sort of deep inquiry. Because people know that you have a right to do that. Let me put it to you this way. Hypothetically, you go behind closed doors and you meet with Mr. Herndon, and you don't tell anybody about it, and you don't put it on the next meeting's minutes or anything. And then it comes up later that several of you, or all of you, or maybe even one of you was behind closed doors with somebody we don't know who, because there's no record of it. What does that look like? What does it look like to the public who is watchdogging you? Whereas, on the other hand, if you say, look, we know the law protects us in doing this. This is our attorney-client privilege. He's the attorney. We all are the client. And so we have a right to do this, and we have a right to have these behind closed doors conversations. And we're just going to, the next time we have a meeting, we're going to put it in the minutes on such and such a day from such and such a time, not even such, on such and such a day, we had an executive session. You don't necessarily have to say which of you was there and which of you wasn't. Just that we had it. My opinion is that that would tend to deflect a lot of inquiry, because then people will say, okay, they met with their lawyer. No big deal. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Yes, sir, I do have one quick question. Again, thank you for the presentation. What if you have any conversation with a non-voting member of your board that has no bearing on the decision that's going to be made because they don't have voting authority? Non-voting members on our board.
The non-voting member. Here's what the courts in Tennessee have said, pretty consistent. Early 70s, and the other one was in the mid 90s. The non-voting member is still a member, still shows up to the meetings, and still participates in the discussion, right? And so even if that person finally, in the final tally, doesn't cast a vote, that person still influences the debate by adding their own commentary and their own deliberations to that debate. And so if, let's say, this non-voting member is Mr. Charisma, or and then and gets behind closed doors with you, and you're a voting member, and influences you to change your vote of the board, and the courts are going to say yes. And so that basically, whether it's voting or non-voting, here's your rule of thumb. If there is more than one of you discussing board business or commission business, it's a meeting, and it needs to be under the gavel and on the record. If there's only one of you standing at home alone, staring into your mirror, discussing board business, that's not a meeting. You might have other problems. But it's not a meeting of the board that's going to get you into trouble. But yeah, the non-voting members are going to be treated just like regular members for the purposes of that discussion, deliberation, debate, decision.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Again, thank you for your presentation. I'm a little confused on one thing you said about not doing the aye vote or the nay vote versus the roll call.
Sure. If you've got, basically, if you don't have to have 100% of the people here, okay? You do have to have a quorum, you understand that? If you have one person or more than one person appearing but not physically here, so they're coming in over the telephone, you know, over the PA, that's when you've got to drop back away from the consensus vote, the voice vote, and you have to go back into the roll call.
Right.
Anytime you've got somebody that's part of the meeting, but their keister's not in the chair, you've got to go back to that roll call vote.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, members. Have a great morning.
We'll move on to the legal case report, since we've been talking about legal ramifications.
Stick to the agenda, I guess.
This is on page 45.
Paper 45 and iPad 48. Hey. Start right with it. Cases with updated information is your first heading. Always end up not close to the. All right. This complaint was presented at the April meeting. It involves a licensed architect allegedly committing misconduct by acting outside the area of competence. Mr. Wagster reviewed it, and based on that presentation, the board approved a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for $15,000. All right. Updated information. An informal conference was held on May 29th of this year with the additional participation of Mr. Campbell. Hearing was also involved. So the recommendation actually is for Mr. Campbell, Mr. Wagster to update the board on what they heard at that informal conference and advise you as to whether they think that decision needs to stand or needs to be altered in some way. So does one of y'all want to go first? Age before.
I'll go first. We did have a telephonic informal conference. The person in this case, and just, I guess my short answer is, it didn't change any opinion that I had of what we should recommend or the situation that's involved here, so.
I'll follow up on that as well. In the phone conversation, we pointed out, and Frank did a great job of having a lot more detailed things to point out, but we pointed out the deficiencies that we found on his plans. I don't know that he disagreed with maybe one or two of those throughout the entire conversation, which was probably close to an hour long, going through a pretty detailed list of things, and basically said, yeah, I agree that that's not there, this is incorrect or something. And it really just confirmed that our original analysis and original penalty was the right thing to do.
Righty, what say you? Do you want to vote to keep the previous 15 grand, or do you want to else based on what you've heard?
I'll go ahead and make a recommendation that we stand with the judgment that we recommended to the board.
You need to take a vote, then I need a second.
Second.
Is there any further discussion on this matter? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Like?
Right,
Motion passes.
number 2 is case number 2014-00097. Also presented in April. This respondent is an out-of-state, non-registered individual allegedly practicing engineering regarding a traffic plan in Tennessee. This was sent to Mr. Campbell, who reviewed it, and based on that, the board authorized a formal hearing with a settlement offer of $500 and a requirement to take and pass the board's law and rules exam. I wasn't at the April meeting, but I understand that there was an idea that we could impose the law and rule exam on a non-registrant. And it sounds like a good idea, but we really don't have that authority. Our law and rules apply only to our registrants except in cases where they practice without a license. So the recommendation is to rescind the previous consent order, authorize a formal hearing, the civil penalty of $500, basically take away the law and rule exam.
Any discussion? Comments? Motion?
I make a motion then that we rescind the order to remove the provision for taking and passing the law and rules exam, but that we keep the $500 civil penalty in place and the other provisions of the original motion.
Have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
This is clipping along without Philip and Hal here. Okay, number 3, 2013-020181. This one was also presented in April, last one on this list. And this respondent is an engineering company. They allegedly planned, stamped, and committed fraud by forging a seal without first being registered with the board. Mr. King reviewed this one. The board determined an investigation is appropriate to determine possible fraudulent use of the respondent's seal. Afterwards, the matter needs to be referred to contractors. Okay, this company is in another state. It is possibly outside our jurisdiction. However, we did all kinds of investigation trying to find this particular respondent and figure out a way to get service to him. And we finally came to the conclusion, myself and the staff, that the best thing to do is to close this matter with a letter of warning to the respondent to their last known address and a suggestion to the complainant to file a criminal complaint in a form of competent jurisdiction. I think that would probably get more results for the complainant than anything else we could do. Recommendation.
Discussion? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Like sign. Motion passes.
All right, next heading, cases under board member review. And there's a list of 3 cases here. 2009, 024181, 2, and 3. These are potentially the oldest cases we have. These were presented at the February 2010 meeting, the April 22nd, 2010 meeting, and the June 17th, 2010 board meeting. Some of you may not have been here at that time. So the complaint alleges the respondents, licensed individuals, and entities committed misconduct in the practice of engineering relative to several activities. Generally, the misconduct allegations stem from contract issues, misrepresentation, and unprofessional conduct. There's an extensive complaint history on the respondent professional engineer, and way back then, the board accepted, based on a review by an East and West Tennessee engineer board members, Henderson back then, they approved a formal hearing without first approving a settlement offer. After litigation, it's been brought to my attention that the best thing we can do is to back to a current member, that was Mr. Campbell, who looked at it. Want to add anything about what you found about this? Or basically what we're here to do is approve a settlement offer first and then move to a formal hearing. That's the purpose of it, but Mr. Campbell may have something to add.
I probably ought to go into just quickly the history because, like I said, I think there were 5 total complaints and 3 of them may have been closed. And so the stack was about this big and had been previously reviewed. But this was a case where a registrant in the state of Tennessee had offered to provide services to a homeowner who was experiencing settlement problems with their house, and they were substantial settlement problems, separations, walls, and several other things that were going on. The registrant made some recommendations, and to fix the problem, they went out and installed those. In the meantime, in the last 3-4 years, they've had to make multiple adjustments to those constructed recommendations. They've had to reload piers, screw piers, use shims and other things, and the house is still showing a lot of problems due to settlement. There's doors that don't close correctly or open. There's windows that are cracking around frames. There's separation still at places of the foundation, and it's a fairly extensive thing. And let me just quickly go through that. The complaint alleges misconduct against the registrant. The registrant initially called for 20, and in some cases 24. That was a little unclear. Hydraulically driven pilings to underline rock. In lieu of hydraulically driven piles, screw piles were used. Company advertisements claim they use a structural engineer and the pilings are driven to rock. After a while, the homeowner received another design that proposed 10 spread footings along with other structural members that would tie those together. The respondent says they did not use hydraulic piles because the soil would not allow penetration, and that based on his experience in other homes, the solution he proposed had worked. Other homes in the area. Failure of the system was then blamed on drought conditions because he said the soil was so plastic that when the moisture left the soil, that caused all the settlement and those kind of problems. And then when asked about had he conducted any soil tests or borings, he stated that he had not even proposed that to the homeowner because he thought it would be cost prohibitive. My findings were the original design was based on another project that he had done in the area. There was really no, what I could tell, any analysis done, again, with soil borings or soil testing. The homeowners believe they were getting one solution, hydraulically driven jacks to refusal. What they got were screw piles or screw jacks that have settled, and there, in some cases, gaps this large in there. There were some construction issues. They improperly loaded those jacks to begin with. They seemed to be remedied on the initial return visit of the construction company, and those things kept going. My question, it seemed like the engineer didn't give great information, because if the way I've looked at it, and Laura can speak up more professionally or experience-wise probably than I can, but it seems if the soil were so plastic that a drought causing water to leave the soil would make the pilings unstable, then they should have been able to be hydraulically loaded and driven through the material. And it just, his explanation didn't make any sense to me. It seems like he kind of used one method that may have been cheaper, easier to install, and they promised another. My recommendation is really the only thing that we have in our laws and rules is 0120-02-02, which is proper conduct of practice. And that says the registrant shall at all times recognize the primary obligation to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public in the performance of the registrant's professional duties. And it appears through either profit motive, lack of due diligence, or simple laziness that the registrant put the public at risk. And again, we've got doors that don't properly open or close, which can create fire hazards. We've got, I don't think we've got an imminent failure situation where a house can collapse. However, I'm not a structural engineer, and depending on what part of it does give way, that may be a possibility. And so, based on our rules, the penalty range for this is between $100 and $1,000. And I'm going to suggest $1,000, which I know is on the upper end, but this is a problem the homeowners had to deal with for several years. They've had to go through a lot of aggravation and try to get this problem corrected. And And one thing that bothered me a little bit as I was going through this was the engineer, I hate to use the word doubled down, but it kind of seemed like they kept going through when it was fairly obvious the solution they proposed hadn't worked, they didn't offer other solutions or other means to go in and try to remedy the problem. And sometimes we all have things that we propose that don't work like we think they're going to work for whatever reason. And I think it's incumbent on a professional engineer to say, this didn't work. I'm going to try to go above and beyond and find out why it didn't work. And that doesn't seem to be the case in this case. So that was my recommendation.
So is that in a form of a motion?
Yes, sir. I then make a motion that we issue a letter of warning. Go ahead. $1,000 civil penalty and take and pass the laws and rules exam.
Motion be authorize a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for 1,000 in the Phillip test.
I have a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Other questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes.
That was a monster.
All right, number 5, 2014-000911. The next two Hal looked at, and he's not here, but he did send a recommendation. Number 5 here was presented in the April meeting. The complaint alleges the respondent, a licensed PE, committed misconduct by working outside his area of competence. Hal took a look at it, and I think this is one that he kept kicking now, and after reviewing it and looking at his synopsis, he didn't find any reason to think that this person acted outside his competency. He didn't find any basis for that. He says that his recommendation is to close the case, no formal charges be taken against the registrant. Close it rather than dismiss it in case something comes up later.
Do I have any comment? Motion?
I move that we close this case.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to close this matter. Please, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Right, the next Hale case, 2014-006661, 2, and 3. And this complaint alleges the respondents, who are licensed PEs, committed misconduct by acting outside their area of competence. Hal took a look at that one. Respondent 1's license expires on January 1st of next year. Number 2 expires. 3 expires in July next month of this year. Okay. Hal says there's no basis for the claim that the selling data included information relative to the floodplain impacts activity had a bearing on the complainant's claim for damage. Okay, so he's not anything to hook the respondent directly to it. Further, evidence was presented that as a result of the complainant's legal proceedings, that there were no rulings that indicated were problematic and or referenced individually or singularly as a professionally. Long story short, he didn't find anything that would point to this particular respondent that they did anything out of character with their professional practice, so he recommends closing like before.
Any further discussion? Do I have a motion?
I move that we close this case.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Close.
Righty, new cases is the next heading, of which there are two. 7 is 2014-004821. The complaint alleges the respondent, a licensed PE, committed misconduct by copying a set of plans not prepared by the respondent and produced them as respondent's own in potential violation of the applicable rule on seals, and failed to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public in potential violation of our rule on proper conduct of practice. Further, a civil court in competent jurisdiction found that there was consumer fraud pursuant to the appropriate statute. The respondent did not respond to the complaint. Respondent's license expires at the end of this month and is currently in an inactive status since January this month. All right, recommend authorize a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for voluntary suspension of the respondent's license for a 1-year period.
Comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Last case, 2014-007871. The complaint. Second to last.
This one, what's on the iPads?
Ultimate case, second to last.
You've got an old one, I guess, you printed it out.
Okay, 2014-007871. Complaint alleges the respondent, a licensed PE, sealed and signed a document while he was expired. Pretty garden variety. The respondent admitted to practicing engineering while he was expired. And then there's some expiration dates on here that tell you what the time period was. So recommend authorize a formal hearing with authority to settle with a consent order for a penalty of $500 taken past the Phillip exam.
Any further discussion? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept the recommendation. Please, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion passes.
Okay, now's the last one. Complaint alleges the respondent out-of-state advertising A&E services in Tennessee on its website without finding disclosure forms with the board. The respondent has removed references to Tennessee projects from its website, and it would appear that the respondent is now in compliance. No complaint history for this unregistered respondent. So the recommendation is to close the case with no action since we got compliance.
So moved.
I need a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Hey,
Passes.
I'd like to ask the chair if we could to perhaps go down here to unfinished business where it says qualification-based selection. We have a guest here that would like to speak to the board on that, and I would request that we move that.
We can move that up. If I don't have any objections from anybody else, do I? We can do that. Qualification-based selection.
Morning, and I just arrived, so I don't know if there's been any prequel to this discussion, but my name's David Garst. I'm an attorney with Lewis Thomason. We represent a lot of architects and engineers across the state, and I've talked to Mr. Herndon a number of times about this issue of qualification-based selection and concerns that or just say practical difficulties that our clients run into in complying with the rule and in the hostility that the rule has generated with a lot of municipal or public agencies. I think, I know that this has been discussed with the board before, although I haven't been present for it. I know that there's probably been some discussion by the municipalities themselves, that they feel that the rule creates an unfair competitive advantage not competitive advantage, an unfair negotiation advantage in the architect or engineer who is selected after going through a process that does not allow the public body to have any idea what their fee is ultimately going to be, and selected. Then at that time they first learn what the fee is. If the architect or engineer is unwilling to be reasonable or is unwilling to negotiate in the manner that the municipality or county feels is fair, then they have to restart the process. So there's a lot of hostility to the general proposition that municipalities and counties and public bodies should go through a process having no way to know that the architect or engineer will not take unfair advantage of this at the end. Now, let me say that I don't know any client of mine who disagrees with the fundamental premise that architecture and engineering services should not be bid. It's not a good way to procure for anyone, to procure architecture and engineering services on the basis of pure competitive bidding, pure price wars. It's not a good way to procure any professional service. But there is a practical difficulty that many of our clients do a lot of public work and really have to face a lot of hostility, a lot of mistrust, and that sort of thing with respect to this particular issue. Mr. Herndon and I have been discussing, is there a way that would be permissible under the rule that would allow some level of comfort or confidence that with the selecting body, that an architect or an engineer is not taking advantage of the selection process. I do have a copy of the rule. I know everyone's not sitting there with a copy of it in front of them. Would it be helpful to distribute that? Does everybody remember what it says? Let me just read the piece of it that is the prohibition. Okay. Of course, the Tennessee Code basically prohibits certain governmental entities from selecting and making a decision what architect or engineer to hire based upon bidding. And they are required to select based on qualifications. The rules of this board under 120-02.026 basically take that law and make it a rule of professional conduct by saying that a registrant may not enter into a contract for professional services on any basis other than direct negotiation with any governmental entity that's prohibited, and I'm just going to skip ahead, from taking bids, thereby precluding participation in any system requiring a comparison of compensation. So the concern, and I think that it is the concern, is that a comparison of compensation, a bid or any form of comparison of compensation at the time of selection is the evil that we're trying to eliminate. But if it was possible for firms to somehow present their fee proposal, lock in basically their fee proposal prior to the selection, so that the entire selection process takes place without knowledge of this, but somehow, for example, it was possible for firms to escrow, in essence, a fee proposal that once they are selected, then that's the starting point. It would be, I think that's the only thing that we have been able to think of that might provide some level of, or some reduction of the hostility of this. Now, one of the practical problems is who could hold an escrowed, like a sealed envelope, not presented with the qualifications-based selection information. And I think, and this is just me, and it could be other people, but I think a city attorney could charge for it if they were a on-staff city attorney, and that as a part of a bidding and selection process, they could hold a sealed envelope of the party that was selected ultimately would be opened, and the rest could be returned or destroyed or whatever. Now, obviously, none of this is contained within the law, the rules as currently drafted, but I don't think that some system of this nature would violate the spirit of this law, and I think it would provide a way for firms to I don't know, perhaps if this was put in place, municipalities still would be unhappy. They'll be unhappy until it's wide open competitive bidding. None of my clients want to see that, but this is just something that this is a considerable issue with some municipalities and other public bodies who even will tell our clients that they won't consider them if they won't do something to overcome this fear of their taking unfair advantage of their. So I didn't want to take a lot of your time, and I know that I don't know for sure that it would require rulemaking, but it might require some statement on the part of the board that kind of system would not violate the requirements of the law and rules.
Thank you, David. Do you have any questions?
Let me just a quick question or comment or whatever, I don't know. First of all, thanks for coming, because I think one of the things that we are also looking at is we're looking to have a workshop, or we've had talked to some of the people from CTAS and others about alternative methods to try to get to the way that you're talking about. I would semi-challenge the word hostility. I've had probably discussions with 5 or 6 purchasing agents, county mayors, and those kind of people regarding this personally, and explain why it was there. They seemed appreciative of the fact that we were trying to give them good service and good quality services. Hopefully, the reason we put this in place was because those same municipalities that may be hostile were violating Tennessee Code Annotated. And there was no other way, nobody else was going out of their way to make sure they didn't violate state law. So we had some control over our registrants to make sure that we kept them from violating state law. I mean, that's part of what we try to do. I would contend, though, that there are other methods to find a budget baseline for the services that are there. There are development districts that are across the state that they all have access to. There are public building construction data that they all have access, should have access to. They're their neighbors in surrounding counties, municipalities that have just finished projects like that can give them those kind of things. I think there's state building commissions that have schedules and charts. There's departments of this and that and within the state. I would contend that those counties or municipalities or local entities that are hostile may not be doing what they need to do to develop sound budgets and sound expectations on the project that they're undertaking if they don't understand going in roughly what those costs should be for professional services and what the scope of their projects are. Because typically that's the problem we see from our side and your clients as well. I'm sure there's an RFP put out, and that RFP will say, we want you to design a road from point A to point B. And there's no understanding of what the cost of that road's going to be. There's no understanding of how much effort goes into that. And then there is a sticker shock factor, not just on engineering services, but when they get to the final design phase and it's now double what the cost was because there was a promise made without the homework being done up front. So I understand, I would entertain at some point when we hopefully have some more of these discussions that I thought we were going to have one of those workshops or talk to them some more. You look puzzled, so I may be wrong.
Not on the action item list.
Okay,
but
I
it
thought we
can
were doing
be.
that, but anyway.
May
That
be
we
on
would
your
find,
action.
I would entertain alternate methods to do that, but I would maintain that some of the burden then falls on those municipalities to develop realistic, and they can be hostile, but it's not us that wrote the Tennessee Code Annotated. It's not us. It derives itself from the Brooks Act, which is a federal requirement which the state has adopted. And, there has to be some way to maintain law and order throughout that process, and that's what we're trying to do with our registrants. So that would be my only, but I appreciate your suggestion. I think it's got some merit.
Well, thank you, and
Other
I am
comments,
I'm not suggesting that there aren't entities that. I don't think I'm suggesting any means by which your registrants would participate in a process of bidding. I'm suggesting that there might be of those, and whether or not they have an expectation of what the fee is going to be. Some are concerned through this blind process, the fees would be different. That there is this unfair advantage. Do my clients think it's an unfair advantage? No. Nobody, and many people, by the way, feel, especially the old timers, feel any bidding for any project anywhere on the basis of, for architectural engineering services is unethical. Many people won't even participate in it. But this is a back end measure to whether or not it would work and whether or not there's a better way. I don't know, but I do know that there are firms that are concerned that there should be some way of addressing this.
Thank you, Mr. Garst. I appreciate your comments. I have a couple of questions to clarify. Have there been instances where municipalities have seen unfair negotiation advantage used because of this process? Or just is it a presumption that it will occur?
I would say every time a firm is selected, it has a little bit of a leg up in the negotiation, but whether or not that's unfair, that's, it's a subjective thing. If you are selected, any firm that is selected, you're the one. Hopefully, you are not going to gouge or attempt to do something unfair at that point. But every firm does have, at that point, an ability to go in with a price that they think they would like to see and try to hold to that. Now, whether or not, I don't know of many cases in which parties don't reach agreement based purely on the fee after they're selected, but I do know for sure that governmental and also feel that the negotiation didn't occur the way it should have. Now, I'm on the side of, I would be on the side of the architect or engineer, and I'm not usually involved in fee negotiations, but I would never say my clients are gouging. But I know that that's a accusation that they do receive.
Secondly, I heard you say that it creates burden because if negotiation is not successful with the selected firm, then you have to start all over. It was my understanding you could then go to the second selected firm, and so you're really not starting over. Is that correct?
That's the way that the QBS process is established, and that is true. They could move on to the second firm.
I believe it is. Okay.
Often, yes.
Candy, did you want to say something? Okay.
And I want to make it clear that Mr. Garst is not representing ACEC of Tennessee or TSPE in his comments.
Thank you.
Not at all. I'm not representing anybody in particular, although I do have clients who have talked to me about this issue and have caused
I have a couple of comments. First, I'd like to echo what Robert said earlier. It's my impression that some of the complaining actually is coming from the AEs, that somebody else gets the job and they run to the local government and say, hey, I'd have done it for half the price. So there's more surprise, and even though we've done everything in the world to try to get the message out to the registered professionals of Tennessee, there's a lot of them still don't seem to know that. That's part of the problem. The other thing is, if you really want to eliminate fee negotiation, you tell them what the fee is. You know, a good example of that is the state of Tennessee projects, which is a formula. And you get the job and your fee is whatever the agreed on fee is prior to you even submitting a proposal. So that's the simplest way, and probably the most equitable way, is you've already got it, the municipality would already have the fee established, and then you select the firm, and their fee is what's already been established.
I agree that that's a method. I also know that our clients sometimes feel that method results in, on some types of more complex projects, state work being, the fee being frankly too low.
Make your fee whatever you want it to be.
Well, true.
And the firm can either respond or not. The other thing that seems a little questionable in what you were proposing is if you select the architect and you've got another envelope that you only open his after the selection, or engineer, how do you know that he didn't put a large fee in his envelope? I mean, it seems to me like you're at the same point you were whether or not you had the fee in an envelope or whether he told you what it was. I couldn't see that you were accomplishing anything by doing that.
That may be the case. I mean, it could be abused on that end. But there should be something, I think there should be something that could be done that doesn't violate the active comparison at the time of selection. And I think it would be a bad idea to open all the envelopes, because then you would be having a post-selection bidding. You would have the ability to move to the next low bidder, to the next selectee, which might become moving to the next low bidder. I think it would be a bad idea to open all the envelopes.
Well, I agree.
Yeah.
Say something quickly.
I just want to go on record, too, saying it's Ashley Cates with American Institute of Architects, that David, Mr. Garst's comments do not reflect the societies, the state societies. We support the RFQ process or qualification-based selection process as it is. And I'm happy, I haven't heard anything from our members, but I'm happy to, if you have any of your clients that are members of the AIA, to come forward and our board can discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Is there anything else? Any other, I'm sorry.
Thank you, David, thank you for coming here with your comments. And I agree with what Frank said. And I feel like the existence of some sealed envelopes that don't get opened is just as problematic with the public trust as a straightforward negotiation process, as long as the public entity realizes if they can't negotiate successfully, they can move on to number two. They're not pinned to any, so there is a method there that they can't be gouged. It's simply move on to number two. And if they can't, if they feel like they're being gouged, if they move through the whole selection, then yes, they have to back up. But I think the answer is more along the lines of what Robert said as far as an alternative, and that would be education, and we can offer a lot of ways to educate the government entities on design fees and what they should be. And at the April meeting, there were several municipal league representatives here that felt like that could be accomplished, and this method was in the overall best interest of everybody.
Thank you. I understand that. I do think that the ability to just start moving down the chain would be really problematic. I mean, it's possible, but it's antithetical to the concept that you're making a qualifications-based selection and you just start moving down your chain to qualified people to find a price. That's not good either. So I'd be happy to, if you do have a workshop or if you like, not representing obviously the professional associations, and I didn't indicate that I was, but a lot of architect and engineer clients who struggle with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other comments? I guess one, go ahead.
Let me just say, since I think I'm the only person on the board who works for a municipality, so, well, that's true, but he's not here.
Or he would be done.
I think the issue, and this happens in large cities and counties and small cities and counties, depending on who is managing the particular project. If the local government project is managed by a professional who understands how things are done, things go pretty smoothly, and that professional understands why you have to do a BAT study to build a bridge or whatever you run into. It's where, and this can happen in a large city. Sometimes administrations assign projects to non-technical people that try to build technical jobs, and you're going to have problems like this. The answer still is to stick with QBS and to move toward a quality design for that project, not to come up with some scheme that's similar to low bidding professional services, even though we don't want to call it that.
Appreciate it. Do we all want to take a short break?
Yes.
Let's take a 5-minute before we start the next item.
Rick, you had to stay here. You take it.
Buddy, I just turned 60. My bladder's gone.
You checked out an hour and a half ago.
Robert, how'd you like to be 80?
Do what?
How'd you like to be 80?
80.
I said, how would you like, you said you just turned 60?
No, I said he did.
Oh,
I did.
oh.
I was sitting there going, God, I'm not close to 80 yet.
No, I said,
But
yeah.
it's not how you feel, it's how you look.
I wasn't talking about his bathroom break. I was talking about the fact that he's just sitting over there like, it looked like a zombie.
Are we back on? Okay, we're back in session. Mr. Director?
Yes, I have a brief report for you. Well, hopefully it'll be brief. National Council meetings. Philip Lim, Stephen King, Rob, and I attended the NCEES Southern Zone meeting in Charleston, South Carolina in April. And we had a report on that, rather lengthy report at the Engineer Committee meeting. I guess maybe Robert will give a brief summary of some of the high points from that. A request has been approved for Rick Thompson, Jerry Headley, Frank Waxter, and I to attend the NCARB annual meeting in Philadelphia next week. So we will soon be heading to Philly. A request has been approved for Hal Balthrop, Philip Lim, Stephen King, Laura Reinbold, Rob Herndon, and I to attend the NCEES annual meeting in Seattle in August 20th through the 23rd, I believe it is. And that's more members than we've sent to one meeting in a long time, so I was pleased that that was approved. Robert and Ricky will not be attending that meeting. They're unable to attend. That may have helped us get approval, actually, having 6 versus 8. I think that did help a little bit. So thank you for not coming, Robert and Ricky.
I have to move my daughter into college, so that's more important.
Also, a request is going to be submitted shortly for Bill Lockwood and I to attend the CLARB annual meeting in Reston, Virginia. That's outside D.C. in September. It's September 24th through the 27th. That meeting's going to include board member training provided by CLEAR, which you may have never heard of. It's the Council on Licensure, Enforcement, and Regulation. They provide training for board members and investigators and other staff. So I think that'll be a good session. And we do actually have in our budget money for 2 board members to attend, if we so choose, if we want to send someone besides just Bill and I. Yeah, any volunteers? It's September 24th through the 27th. So y'all have time to think about it. I can send out an email to everybody just to give them the dates, and then if anybody's interested, to send 2 board members to the CLARB annual meeting. I think since they're doing the board member training, I think that would be a good meeting to attend, but it's up to y'all. But we do have that in our budget. Other meetings, Hal Balthrop and I spoke on qualifications-based selection at the Tennessee Association of Public Purchasing, TAP, conference on May 1st in Franklin. We had about 40 people in attendance from across the state, and I think it was a very well-received presentation. We didn't receive a lot of hostility. As Robert noted, I don't know that there's necessarily a lot of hostility out there, but we didn't notice it. We did have one individual from Knoxville that's familiar with Mr. King that was a little bit hostile, but Hal was able to calm him down. Hal's really good at that, so I think he left satisfied, I believe. Administrative issues. The rules approved at the August 2013 rulemaking hearing are going to have to be returned to the Attorney General's office due to a change in the filing procedures, which will delay their implementation, but we're hoping that they will still take effect later this year, maybe October, November, potentially, somewhere in that range. So we're kind of frustrated about that it's taking us over a year for rules to take effect, but it will take effect eventually. Letters requesting grant proposals are going to be sent out next month because, as I'll note in a moment in my legislative report, our grants were included in this year's appropriations bill, which is passed. And we have received approval to meet at Montgomery Bell State Park in October. This meeting is going to include a meeting with deans from across the state, and there's a proposed agenda later on in our agenda for today that we can discuss. And I'll move on to your legislation, which I think is, page 52, I believe, or thereabouts.
Can I ask a question? You
Yes.
just said October.
Right. That'll
Why
be
do
our
I have it down
retreat.
in September?
I don't know. But
And
it
it's
is
on
October.
It's on the website as September, I think, too.
Is it? That would be a Wanda Garner issue.
Well, and I could be wrong. I mean, hand to God, it's so easy for me to be wrong on this.
October, but we can check that, right?
But I've got it, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, it is in October.
What's the date?
Remember the dates, Wanda? Is it the 10th through the 12th, I believe? That's right. I think it's October 10th through the 12th.
I think I was, yeah. And maybe I'm looking at the wrong board. Am I in the right place?
This is the mortuary board.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay, legislation. You'll see that Representative Tidwell's bill, it's the first bill listed there, did not pass. The bill that revises provisions governing failure to pay the privilege tax did pass, and basically that legislation means that we're no longer going to have formal hearings authorized for privilege tax cases. We're no longer going to have to open complaints, right, Rob, regarding those cases. We simply will get a list of those that are delinquent, and we just won't renew them until the delinquency is remedied. So, yeah, I think that'll be administratively, it may actually be a little more challenging depending on how many delinquencies we have. But, yeah, from the complaint side of things, it'll make things a lot easier for sure, because it's a pain having to schedule formal hearings. Let's see. The Senate Bill 2053, House Bill 2381 passed. That directs that a plan for implementation of an apprentice program be created for certain state agencies. I don't think that's going to really impact us much, but we may have to prepare some report to comply with that legislation. And finally, the Noah, Dean, and Nate Act did pass. That's the last bill listed there, to lessen the likelihood of electric shock drowning near marinas and boat docks. And the bill that removed fire sprinkler requirements from places of worship under certain circumstances, which the board voted to oppose, that has been deferred for summer study, and I know that study's being conducted right now, so it's possible that there may be future legislation on that issue. And finally, Section 7, Item 26 of the Appropriations Bill does earmark $300,000 from the board's grants program. So I track that every year just to make sure nobody forgets to put that in there, so it did pass. All right. Complaint data is...
John,
question?
A question on the legislative. When we oppose a bill such as Senator Nicely's bill about the fire sprinkler, and they're conducting hearings right now, as you stated, do you or some representative from this board go to that hearing and express our opposition to that proposed legislation?
No, we don't, I don't, and our staff, we don't personally do that. We do make our legislative liaison in the department and the legislative staff in our department aware of the board's opposition, and then they, of course, can voice that opposition when they go up the hill. And, of course, our societies are aware of it as well, our society representatives. But that's the extent of it, of us making them aware of our opposition.
Is that enough?
Well, we're required to go through our department's legislative liaison and any communications with the legislature. So there's certain restrictions placed upon me personally doing that type of activity.
We don't necessarily know whether
No, I'm not usually
what
made
kind
aware
of
that. Yeah. Not
representation
normally.
we're getting at that hearing as far
Right.
as our opposition is concerned.
Right. I would assume that our society representatives, they're all gone except for
So
Yeah,
so we're
I would assume
depending
Candy
on
at least
the
makes them aware
societies
of
to
it.
express our viewpoint. Then is that's it? Because if we don't know, there's not much use in us taking any action if we're not going to participate in the process, I think, and express our.
Well, normally we do it at
concern.
the request of the society, so I'm assuming that
Okay.
that it's of value to them, to AIA and TSPE.
I
Normally they ask us to.
Yeah, I am aware that the AIA Tennessee Government Relations Committee has noted that we oppose this And so I know they
That's
bring
how
that
we
in.
get our voice then to the legislature.
Yeah, and I would assume the state fire marshals are the ones really going after this.
The complaint data is on page 53, I believe, on your iPads. And that's just a snapshot of all open complaints as of June the 3rd, and we've opened some since then that were on our staff complaint report. But you'll see that our complaint numbers have gone down substantially. At this time, we only had 15 open complaints, which is probably a record low for our board. I'm not sure why we've seen such a dramatic decline in the number of complaints. I mean, when I started with the board, I think we had like 100+ open complaints at that time. And it's, of course, slowly declined over the years, but I think now that we've cleaned up some of our old cases that had been sitting for many years, the very small number of complaints. I think for a program with over 20,000 licensees, it's a very small number, far less than you would expect. Maybe it's the result of our great enforcement activities and education efforts, or maybe it's things just aren't being reported to us.
Or people trying to keep their noses clean.
Right, could be, yeah. Maybe that's the answer. But if you're aware of any violations, please let us know, because if we get down to 0 complaints, then it may draw the attention of the legislature when we have our sunset review.
John and I have actually determined that every so often we're going to meet with the fire marshal's office and see what kind of stuff is coming across their desk, just to see what's happening. Yeah, because we kind of need to work together. It can't be that there's no violations at all.
Yeah, I'm sure there's violations out there. I mean, you look at the complaint information from bordering states. I think most of them have more active complaints than we do. I don't think that violations stop when you cross the state line into Tennessee. So, yeah, I'm sure there's violations out there. We're just not aware of them. And I know we used to receive a large percentage of our complaints from the State Fire Marshal's office. Basically stopped in recent years, stopped completely almost. So maybe that's something we can address by trying to meet with them on a routine basis.
What about the state health department?
Yeah, we never did receive, I don't think, a large number from them, but occasionally they still do refer complaints to us. You may remember the case in December where we had the disruptive architect. That was that Mr. Robert had to.
Campbell took care of that.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that was referred to us by Department of Health. So.
Just remember what profession he was in.
Yeah.
Well, they were involved in it, I should say. I don't know that they referred it to us, but.
Those are all.
Okay. Financial data, page 55 or thereabouts on your iPads. You will see that revenue has decreased a little over $50,000 from the third quarter of last fiscal year, which is nothing to cause alarm, because that's almost entirely due to the fact that the board no longer collects engineering exam fees. So that's a decline that we expected to see. All of those fees are now being paid directly to NCEES rather than being paid to us, and us in turn sending the money to NCEES. And of course, we'll see a corresponding reduction in our expenses as well as a result. But we're not seeing it this time, because all of our grants were paid out in the third quarter versus the fourth quarter last fiscal year. So we had overall our direct expenditures for this quarter increased versus the third quarter last fiscal year. But again, that's primarily just due to the grant funds all being expended in this quarter. I don't think there's any other surprises in the report. You have the expenditure detail if you want to drill down further, and the revenue detail, and also your colorful charts and graphs. Any questions about financial information? No. Licensing data begins on page 65. Number of applications reviewed and approved, and also the number of registrants. And of course, you'll see our totals overall continue to increase, well over 20,000 registrants at present. And that's only architects, engineers, landscape architects, and interior designers, not including firms. Of course, that would increase the total further. That concludes my director's report, unless you have any questions.
Here's committee meeting report. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go through this fairly quick, and I'll try not to overlap too much with what John has said. Item number one, our engineering exam results. As you know, we've started computer-based testing, and the results are kind of right now mixed a little bit. We started out very low, about 30% of our normal, but the last period or so, we've seen an increase in that, those numbers. It's something for us to continue to monitor and be concerned with. Hopefully we'll come to kind of a level point. Some people have mentioned the procedure is a little confusing. Some have mentioned the cost is prohibitive, but we'll continue to monitor that over the next year. The people that did take it, it was an outstanding percentage. It was like 86% pass, so that was probably almost 20 points higher than a normal time. So that was a good thing. The NCAA Southern Zone meeting, and I wasn't there, so if I leave something out, let me get around here. I had that turned over here, and I apologize. Some things that were discussed. The structural engineers are wanting are talking again. Some are talking again about a separate licensure for structural engineers. That's something that we as an engineering committee probably don't agree with. We don't understand exactly where you draw those lines, and you continue to segment disciplines further and further, then we kind of lose the identity that we have as engineers. So we right now, unless there's some compelling argument, would oppose that. Still, there was some discussion, and I'm assuming it was by me, about the finances of NCAAS. They made a motion, I think it was last year, to have 100% reserve, which we voted against, and now they've got another $2.9 million in surplus, so they're marching towards that 100% reserve number. So the question is, what do they do when they get above 100%? They're now looking at potentially having the PE test done electronically by 2017. I think that's off by about a year, 6 months to a year from what they originally forecasted, and so that's something that we'll need to look at. There's several task force going on, some other things that we discussed as far as votes that are going to be taken at the annual meeting, but nothing that was really crazy, except for maybe the B plus 30, which is just a bachelor's degree plus 30 extra hours. There is some discussion about removing some of those references in the model law, because really that's a motion that the NCAAS have adopted a few years ago, but no state has adopted it yet. And part of the reason for that is it's a cloudy rule. Some have said it means going to get a master's degree. Some have said it means 30 extra hours, and nobody really has been able to define that. And so we won't jump on that train until somebody lets us define that a little bit better. We talked about our licensing agreement with Japan. It doesn't sound nearly as contentious as what you architects have gone through. Basically, the agreement says that if somebody from Japan wants to seek registration in Tennessee, they have to follow our laws, rules, and go through the same procedure that a normal registrant would have. But it's a piece of paper saying that we would, we welcome them, we encourage them, and we would hope there's some positive economic impact, brotherhood, because they have made a significant investment in the state of Tennessee, and hopefully that will help foster some of that as well. Then we have a policy, and I think this is are we voting on this, John? Does there, the policy, or no, we didn't have enough people?
We were going to
Wait till next
do
meeting.
some revisions and then
That's correct.
discuss it at the next meeting.
But it was a policy on the use of the PE seal on review letters. What spurred this was a piece of equipment that was integral to part of the building people would be climbing up on and had some mezzanine factors. Exactly, one of the building officials was wanting a PE to stamp that and kind of drawing those lines on where those are review letters, when you have to have calculations involved, and exactly what level some of those pre-manufactured or pre-engineered items have to go through. And there was some confusion on a few of those, and Ricky's worked on a draft policy of that we're going to make a couple revisions to, and then bring it back to the board next time to talk about and fully execute, we hope. So that was about all we talked about at the engineer meeting. We did talk about Hal and Philip a lot, and we did make a lot of fun of them. And so anyway, that made the meeting worthwhile, and that's all we had.
No action required. Architects Committee report.
Okay. We met this morning in this room, my colleagues and John. We had some new business application and audits for review, which we've handled that. Discussion and signature. It's just test exams and comedy. We discussed some proposed NCARB resolutions, and we had previously looked at these and reviewed them and had no negative comment on them. The only one that was in question was the fact that NCARB is requesting, or they want to pass, I guess it's a rule, resolution.
Bylaws change.
Yeah, bylaws change that in order to be an officer or a director of NCARB, you have to have an NCARB certificate. I assumed he already had to. I mean, where did that come from? But New York objected to it, and one other state objected to it. We agree with the resolution, and we're going to support it. I mean, it's our thought process. And then the one that's a little more contentious was the unfinished business, and that was our mutual recognition agreement between NCARB and CALA, Canadian Architectural Licensing Authority. We went back through, I think this is on page 25 of on the bottom of your scroll when you tap it. I don't know what actual number page it is, but it's on mine it says 25. I think we start there. 24, I'm sorry, on my iPad. I think they're all a little bit different today. This is the mutual recognition agreement, and it's a bigger document than the letter. We go over to page 3 of that document. Of that document. In the limitations section, well, there's a definition, which you can read that if you'd like, but it requires 2,000 hours of post-licensure experience to be licensed in the United States or there. Limitation, if you read through the limitations, and I'll read it into the record if that's okay. Nothing in this agreement limits the ability of an NCARB member board or CALA jurisdiction to refuse to license, register an architect, or impose terms, conditions, restrictions on his or her license registration as a result of complaints or disciplinary or criminal proceedings related to the competency, the conduct, or the character of that architect where such action is considered necessary to protect the public interest, which in our realm is HSW. And it goes on to state nothing in this agreement limits the ability of NCARB or an NCARB member board, of which we are, or a CALA jurisdiction to seek appropriate verification of any matter pertaining to the foregoing or the eligibility of an applicant under this agreement. We read into this is that we still have the ability to do this if we need to, if we're required to, that we're not just signing off. And so that's been kind of point of contention. We do have the ability on the next page, page 4, it outlines our ability to withdraw from this agreement with a written notice, 90 days. If we feel like this is not working in our best interest for the state of Tennessee, we have the ability to withdraw from this agreement. Currently, as you well know, or you may not know, but we have 2 Tennessee architects that have been refused licensure in Canada because this agreement was not in place. And so I would think, and as we discussed this morning, the likelihood of us getting a huge Canadian population in Tennessee is very little. They should be more afraid of Florida than here. So, and that's what the Florida guys were worried about. They're snowbirds coming down, taking over. And then the letter, if you scroll over,
Page 19. Page
I
19.
on some of them, I think.
Letter of understanding, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, the letter of understanding.
That's page 19 on mine.
Where is it?
22, there's 22 of 101. It says mutual recognition, in respect mutual recognition, our national something. On 22 on my 19 on the numbered pages. Is that right? Or am I-
I think, yeah, 19. It's
the
a
number
letter
page.
of undertaking in respect to the mutual recognition
Yeah.
agreement.
You're right, it's 22 of 101 on the iPad page.
Okay, it's 19 on mine, but anyway, it's the letter of undertaking, and this is what our current chairman will be signing, so we can practice in Canada, and they can come to us, and we will. It says that at number 4. I think we had a little heartburn with this, but we feel that we cannot impose additional education, experience, or examination requirements because they will already have a CALA and an NCARB certificate, which to get those, you have to meet that. It's not exactly our criteria, but that's criteria good enough for us. And on the next page, it references back to the mutual, the MRA, Mutual Recognition Agreement, and as long as it satisfies the MRA, which gives us the ability to go do additional things if we absolutely have to. And I don't know if you've seen an NCARB jacket, but it's pretty substantial about all the qualifications. So, excuse me.
Robert, this letter will, based on that conversation or that line item 5, referring back to the MRA, gives this validity tying back to that piece of letter. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Says copy of mutual recognition agreement attached to that letter, so. Attached to
Yeah.
it. Okay.
It's a little different language in the letter than it is in the MRA, but it references back to the MRA, which does not eliminate us from, where's the line that we had this morning about the regulations?
Under 4, the previous page, number
Paragraph
4.
yeah.
It's the last sentence. However, the authority may impose familiarity, anyway, tongue-tied with that, familiarity with local laws and other local requirements that apply to all domestic applicants seeking reciprocal licensure. So it leaves us, if we have, it gives us a door that we can ask for additional
Ask for additional information, but we're not going to be able to impose additional education requirements. Certainly wouldn't want them doing that to us. So, the architects voted this morning and recommended that we execute this on, and Rob said they would doing it reluctantly, but they would do it. So that's our recommendation, and I'm sure we'll have to have a motion and a full board.
As Rick said, in this, we do have, if it's not working for us, we do have that option to opt out of it.
Right. And if you're licensed in either jurisdiction from the United States or Canada, opt out, then those people who are currently licensed from Tennessee and Canada, or Canada and Tennessee, can remain licensed until the renewal, which it won't affect you. They won't just go cancel your license. Okay. So it's, it's our report, and I don't know if we need to do a motion right now, or, okay.
I move that we sign the letter of undertaking in respect of the mutual recognition agreement between NCARB and Carla.
Have a second.
I'll second.
So I have a motion and a second to accept the letter. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Did you want to say, I'm sorry. Is it too late? Okay.
I'm surprised you didn't put a provision about swapping Krispy Kreme and Tim Hortons donuts in here.
All right, so that passed.
I don't think they'd let us do so.
All
We'll
right.
take it to the meeting, though.
Had a brief report for the interior design group. We had a webinar conference call on May 13th with NCIDQ, and I'm pleased to report that with the new FX format on the examination, we had 2,100 participants this April. So that was a huge increase over last fall, which was the initial launching of the new exam format. So we're very excited about that. And our national meeting will be in Albuquerque, New Mexico in November. So we'll have, yes, right before Thanksgiving. So anyway.
And, well, at least you get into some warm weather.
All right, on to unfinished business. Mr. Collins?
Action items, page 67. Draft a notice of rulemaking hearing, done on the agenda. Review all board meeting material, only you can answer that. So there you go. And there's information about the state symbol. I think Wanda was working on this in lieu of making sure our iPads were downloaded correctly, and she was working so hard on the state evergreen tree.
I just want to say, I was very appreciative that I had a place to stay last night. Thank you. So while everybody else is giving you crap, remember who's thanking you for that.
Okay. And rulemaking hearing notice, now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of this meeting. That's page 68 or thereabouts on your iPads. I have to qualify everything with thereabouts. Now, you don't have the Regulatory Flexibility Act letter or memo from Rob, so will you have those to hand out? Would you mind handing those out, Wanda? Make yourself useful, Wanda. Okay.
I'm just kidding. Payback.
I make a motion that we censor our executive director.
Second.
We have fun every day in our office. All right. All right, well, we're not going to discuss that that memo yet, but just so you have it. Okay, let's go to the notice of rulemaking hearing. This is a draft. Well, the first change on here, I'll let Rob explain this. The hearing date on the draft is August, but in fact, we're not going to be able to make that date due to the filing requirements. So when are we going to schedule it, Rob?
October.
Have to be
Have it at
October.
our retreat.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll have to.
Which is number 9.
Statutory, we don't have enough time statutorily to have it in August. October, and we won't be here, we'll be at Montgomery Bell, but we can still have our hearing.
Okay.
Probably have to talk about that again when we get to our October agenda.
October 12th, yeah, we'll have to amend the agenda to allow for a rulemaking hearing on that Friday of our retreat. All right, there is a summary after the notice of rulemaking hearing, there's a summary of all the changes, but you do have the red line version here that shows all of the changes being made. I'm not going to necessarily go through all of them. There's a lot of amendments to delete gender-specific language, which was a point that was brought up some time ago. I think when we did our last rulemaking hearing, we amended some of the rules to delete gender-specific language, but we couldn't amend all of them at that time. So now we're doing some housekeeping and going back and making all of our rules consistent where it doesn't use that gender-specific language. A new rule is being proposed regarding military applicants, spouses, and expedited registration. That's Rule 0120-01.28, which will provide for expedited issuance of licenses for veterans and their spouses, waiver of renewal requirements for those on active duty, and the acceptance of military education, training, or experience if substantially equivalent to state standards as required by a law that was passed last year. And that rule was discussed, I think, at length at our last meeting, and the board was supportive of making that change. And it was explained that we don't necessarily ever have to license anyone under this provision, but it is required that it be in our rules. It's worded permissively. Proposed Rule 0120-02.02, proper conduct of practice, is amended to state that if a registrant becomes aware of a decision taken by an employer, client, or contractor against the registrant's advice, which violates applicable federal, state, or local laws, regulations, and codes, which may affect adversely the safety, health, and welfare of the public, the registrant shall report the decision to the authority having jurisdiction charged with the enforcement of the applicable federal, state, or local laws, regulations, and codes. And that was a change that was suggested by Joe Carson originally to broaden that particular rule where it didn't only apply to registrants who design buildings, because right now it's kind of focused on building design. Additionally, paragraph 6 of the rule, which addresses qualifications-based selection, is amended to update a statutory citation. You know, it changed to section 124107A, and to clarify that a registrant may not submit any information as part of a proposal for a public project that's based on competitive bidding. So we adopted some new wording there, or proposing to adopt some new wording there. Also, Rules 0120-02.06, acceptance of work, and 0120-04.10, professional conduct, are amended to delete or to adopt new language regarding misrepresenting one's qualifications to a prospective or existent client or employer. I believe that largely mirrors language adopted in Mississippi, I think is where we borrowed most of that from. And also the misconduct rule is amended to delete, delete gender-specific language and add a new paragraph stating that a registrant may not utilize the seal of another registrant without the other registrant's knowledge or consent, which is a complaint issue that came up last year, I believe. That's a summary of all the changes. Hopefully y'all have had time to review the draft notice. And we do have Rob's memo.
Once y'all digest this and make any changes you feel are necessary, then you adopt it through a vote. After that, we're going to go through the regulatory flexibility, answer a few questions here at the end, as required by applicable authority.
We need a motion?
Well, if you don't want to, okay, Mr. Campbell.
We had discussed briefly in the engineering committee meeting the need to, at some point, possibly remove the residency requirement.
That's in our pending rule changes.
That is in the pending, okay.
That were approved
Okay.
last August.
Okay, I
Yeah,
couldn't remember,
they
okay,
are,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
okay,
It was a
never
long
mind.
time ago.
Yeah, it's so long ago we've forgotten.
Okay,
It's pending.
Okay.
I have a motion. Yes, sir.
One question. Does anybody have a concern that we are going to do the rulemaking hearing at the retreat at Montgomery Bell rather than here in Nashville that we could be criticized for
Properly
changing
noticed.
these rules and doing it at a place that may be a little difficult for
Well,
some
they can
people to
submit
get to?
written,
Huh?
they can submit written comments. They don't have to physically be
Okay.
there. If it-
Advertised.
Yeah.
Notice.
It'll be noticed like any other meeting, and if they want to come to the beautiful setting we're having it in, that'll be pleased to have them. We
Are having the deans, right?
So we might have an audience for the rulemaking hearing.
And we'll publish a summary of the rules with a link to the complete text in our newsletter
And
that
instructions
I'm
that
hoping
they
will go
can-
out soon.
Instructions that people can submit written
Right.
comments, which will be read into the record at the time, and you'll have a chance to answer their questions, and then I have to write them a letter memorializing your response. So I don't see a problem with it. I mean, it's a point well taken, and I thought about just kicking it to December when we're actually here, but kind of need to get this going because it takes so long to do. We're getting asked about the military, frankly, we're getting asked about the military rule, and we've got to get that going.
I'm fine. Just ask the question.
Any other comments? Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept the draft rule changes. Please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes.
All right, now you have to, before we can do anything else on this project, we have to adopt this Regulatory Flexibility Act. Do y'all have this?
Hard copy of it.
Okay.
That's what you sent out.
I'm going to read it into the record, and then at the end, there's some questions we have to put some answers on here as a suggestion. You definitely don't have to accept them, but it's just sort of model answers. Regulatory Flexibility Act requires that prior to initiating the rulemaking process, all agencies shall review all proposed rules and the effect that the proposed rules have on small businesses. The Act requires that each agency shall employ a regulatory flexibility analysis utilizing regulatory methods that accomplish the objectives of applicable statutes while minimizing any adverse impact on small businesses. The Act further provides that the agency shall consider without limitation certain methods of reducing small businesses while remaining consistent with the public's health, safety, and welfare, and those methods are as follows. The extent to which the rule or rules may overlap, duplicate, or conflict with other federal, state, and local government. Clarity, conciseness, and lack of ambiguity in the rule or rules. The establishment of flexible compliance and/or reporting requirements for small businesses. The establishment of friendly schedules or deadlines for compliance and/or reporting requirements for small businesses. The consolidation, I think that's supposed to be or, simplify reporting requirements for small businesses. The establishment of performance standards for small businesses as opposed to design or operational standards required in the proposed rule. And the unnecessary creation of entry barriers or other effects that stifle entrepreneurial activity, curb in next section here is what you just were summarized. There's some information on here that we're proposing to have it on October 10th, and of course the notice of rulemaking has to be filed at the Secretary of State no later than August 13th, and there's no way we can do that. It's got to go through the governor's office, through this whole department, before we can file the notice, and that's not going to happen before August 13th. Okay, now, down on page 3, regulatory flexibility analysis, methods of reducing impact. Okay, this is our statement, these 7 things on here, and then underneath I've written what I propose as an answer, but you don't have to adopt it. Overlap, duplicate, or conflict with other applications. No overlap, duplication, or conflict with other federal, state, or local governmental rules because the board is the sole authority for establishing minimum requirements for obtaining and maintaining a license for the professions it regulates. Just go through all of them and then you can talk about it. Clarity, conciseness, and lack of ambiguity in the rules. The rules are clear in purpose and intended application and not subject to varying interpretations. Flexible compliance and/or reporting requirements for small businesses. The proposed new rule and rules are not expected to impact small businesses in any direct way. Friendly schedules or deadlines for compliance and/or reporting requirements. There is no variation in reporting requirements for design firms in Tennessee of any size. Consolidation or simplification of compliance or reporting requirements. These amendments to new rules do not address the operation of design firms, only individual registrants. Performance standards for small businesses. Currently, the board only requires that design firms register with the board and does not issue licenses to businesses of any kind or dictate business practices of design firms. These proposed rules have no effect on current standards. And then the last one is barriers or other effects that stifle entrepreneurial activity, curb innovation. Amended and new rules proposed do not contemplate an impediment to innovation or I want to do this section and then go to the governor's office questions, or just do it all at once?
What's the board's pleasure? Keep going?
No.
Do it all. Keep going.
Okay. Additional questions posed by the governor's office. Does the rule make it better to do business in Tennessee? Yes, these rules propose to add methods of expedited licensure for military personnel and their spouses who come to Tennessee through the course and scope of their service. Make it easier. Yeah. Jobs in Tennessee. Other than the expedited application process provided for military personnel and their spouses, these proposed rules are not expected to have a significant impact on job creation. Is it essential and effective? Yes. Affect all registered licensees of the board and military applicants and their spouses, and if positive move, yes. Is it outcome based? These proposed rules are expected to have a positive outcome in the insurance. Only the most qualified design professionals are to be selected for projects. Positive outcome in the insurance that only the most qualified design professionals.
Do I have any comments or questions on these? Do I have a motion?
I make a motion. Make a motion that we accept the memorandum with the Regulatory Flexibility Act that has just been presented by staff.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. We've already done the qualification-based section, so, okay.
Well, we've still got some other items under QBS. Begins on page, let's see. There we go. Page 88 or thereabouts. Our FAQs regarding qualifications-based selection that you've seen numerous times. We've still got some outstanding issues that need to be addressed. One of those is question 6 that it's highlighted in your document. Does TCA 124107A apply to landscape architectural services? We've done some additional research in that. We found that architectural and engineering services were not added to the QBS statute, then it was 124106, until 1998, so much more recent than I think we realized. Long after the regulation of landscape architecture began in 1972, so I guess you could assume that landscape architecture was purposely excluded from that statute, since obviously landscape architects were licensed in 1998, but for some reason they weren't included, only architectural and engineering services. So I don't know if we need to change that answer to no. What do you think, Rob?
Well, my first thought was that if it's regulated by this board, it applies to it. John pointed out the statute doesn't specifically say that. The way to resolve it is if it gets tested through a complaint or a lawsuit, I would think. That's the only way to know for sure.
Or an AG opinion, I guess.
I think we're probably all right leaving it that way. I think landscape architects probably should follow that same criteria.
Wait and see if somebody tests it.
My understanding is that there's been some interpretation, at least, that they are included under the federal Brooks Act, landscape architects.
They're specifically mentioned in the Brooks
Are they?
Act.
Okay, when I looked at
Yeah.
the statute, I don't remember them
Or
being.
some portion of it. I know
Okay,
I've
maybe so, okay.
read it.
But at the federal level, we know they're included, so I guess maybe that could bolster the argument that they should be included here as well. Okay, so we're,
Designs the same way.
okay. Well, interior design, we answered that one no, because we only regulate the title, not the practice, so seem reasonable? Okay. Stick to the original answer for landscape architecture then.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
I have an architect that has asked me to submit qualifications for a state project with 2 other people, so he's wanting to use that method as well. So I've done it that way.
But I think the board interprets its own law and rules, and it would be the burden of the person challenging our interpretation.
I don't have a
think
problem
it
going to a
sticks.
higher standard, in the process. So, well, I'm qualified for the project, so.
I'll just make a comment on behalf of the Tennessee Interior Design Coalition. We fully support qualifications-based services, and even though it's not required, we do support it and abide by it when it's asked.
Some other questions I'll draw your attention to. Number 17, does the law and the rule apply to transportation planning services for metropolitan planning organizations? I think one of the comments we got when we had our open forum in, was it April? Yeah, April, was that that's answered really in question 3, so I just put C, response to question number 3. Does TCA 124107A encompass studies and other services that do not involve the preparation of sealed plans? So I think you could all have a different opinion about that.
And board, I think that's been consistent with where we've been on other things, where we said that, for instance, commissioning services, we said if those commissioning services have engineering components to them, then they fall under our jurisdiction, and I think that is consistent with that analogy or same line of reasoning.
Number 18 is the most contentious question. Does the law and the rule apply to sub-consultants who do not contract directly with the government agency? We continue to get questions about this, and we really need to settle on a definitive answer, I think. Of course, one view, the original wording of the question, the answer, is that it only applies to contracts between a state or local government agency and an architect, engineer, landscape architect. Not to sub-consultants who do not contract directly with the government agency. The alternate interpretation, which Candy presented at the last meeting, is that it does apply, because any firm or individual that has been contracted to provide professional services subject to the statute is a representative of the public agency and thus must select subconsultants on the basis of their qualifications. So we've got two differing opinions. Need to choose one or come up with a different one, perhaps.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me say that I support the first one and not the second one that was presented by ACEC. I think if you have selected and gone through the process, the architect or engineering firm that you selected, it's up to that engineering or architectural firm to select whatever subconsultants that they want to select. I think that's enough without further burdening the whole process, because I think we got a process that's unsolvable anyway, so that's just my opinion.
I think there's two situations involved here that I deal with. And the first would be, let's say I have a state project and I solicit proposals from subconsultants. Then that's kind of what the first part says. I can do it on a fee basis. I think it says that. I don't do it that way. I select who I want and I negotiate a fee. But the second part of that the ACEC has here is this. I also have state projects that the state tells me to procure proposals from. Normally, the ones I run into are geotechnical surveying and asbestos abatement consultants. These, they require me to get multiple proposals, always required to have a fee, and submit a recommendation based on that. And usually if I don't recommend the low fee, then they say try again. And so that's a state policy. And the way that gets paid for is I pay for it, I have the agreement, but the state reimburses me plus a percentage, 20%, for those particular consultants. So it's a little different in the state is telling me to do it one way to get the fee proposals. The way I normally get proposal from, I don't usually get proposals. I find out that I know who I want to be the consultant to work with, and we work out a fee. So it's rare that I would actually, unless I'm in a JV with somebody where everybody wants to get together and lowest fee, that usually does. There's two different scenarios there. One is the agreement that I have with a sub-consultant on a normal basis is not directly related to the agreement I might have with a public agency. The other one is I'm being told to do it this way by the public agency. I don't know how you separate that out, but both parts of this, and to change the ones with the state projects where they require me to do these things, that would require a change in their way of doing business.
I'd like to just underscore what you just said, Frank. What we're finding is that this has become a workaround, which is not in the spirit of the statute. That it's, especially for geotechnical firms, it's considered pretty normal to do that. And in fact, we're finding that that's happening more and more as people are learning, and that the action of the board is more known and people are becoming more educated. They're going to a workaround, and it's prevalent, and not only with other designers having to do this, but contractors who are coming in and being brought in for design build. They're coming in, and so you're having someone who is normally used to selecting on bid basis, having to select, or being asked, well, use QBS is just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I personally am pleased to see number 2.
I agree with Wilson. I think that the process can potentially, we're adding a factor. The only qualm I have with any of this is when you are part of a team that has submitted a qualification. I think that it's, I use the word unethical, and I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but I believe that it's not in the best interest of the client to separate that team to try then to go cost shop, if you will, a low price shop, because I think that team has been selected by whatever agency, and that leads to some of the other confusion problems when all of a sudden consultant A is not, or sub-consultant A is not used because you found somebody that could do it cheaper. I think that's where it really smacks of hypocrisy between us as professionals. So I think that's part of it. On the other side of that, I agree with Frank. I don't do a pure request for qualifications because, and maybe this is hubris a little bit, but I believe that I know enough about the sub-consultants that I'm going to use and their expertise and their ability to do things that I would pick the person most suited and with the experience for that job because I'm in the industry. And so on one hand, I agree with number 1 that we shouldn't have that requirement. But on the other hand, if you're part of that team, I think it's incumbent to keep that team together because that's what and keep that. The other thing is on the services part. Is that not a contract? Is that not in the AIA contract, the standard contract to exclude those services? I mean, I've never known why that is, but it seems like that's a checkbox or something that you don't check. I don't know. Maybe that
Services you talk
like surveying and geotechnical and
It's in there, and it's part of the negotiation with your client as to whether you provide those services or not.
I think that the first paragraph there allows that a prime designer who is selected can then bid the sub-consultant's selection. And I think that in the spirit of why qualification-based selection is good for the state and the public, I don't think you can argue that the same thing holds true for the sub-consultants. If it's good to select architects on qualifications, and it can potentially damage the state to select on price, the same thing is true for sub-consultants. We've all seen it on projects. So that, I think, as far as the spirit of the law, number 2 deals with that. I definitely recognize that there are maybe some problems with accomplishing the spirit of the law with sub-consultants, because I don't know what right the state then would have in coming between an agreement between a prime designer and their sub-consultants. It makes me want to know if legally that second paragraph, if what ACEC is saying there is legally correct, that a prime designer can then be seen as actually a public agency. And maybe there's no way to know that unless there was a court case or something. But so I think philosophically and what we're trying to accomplish for the state, I favor number 2, but I understand there may be some legal and some legal difficulties with it and some realistic difficulties.
Anyone else? So I guess really you're looking for a kind of a recommendation from this board on which one we want to go with, or if there's any other changes to any other parts of these questions and answers. A lot of times, I agree with you that a lot of times in your selection process, usually the team is put together when you are making your presentation to a municipality or other organization, and you basically are saying that's the team and the players that are going to be a part of that. To change the team sometimes really changes the complexity of the project, so such that it's not the same group that you wanted to select. So a lot of times that is a problem. But I don't know, I'm not sure that has really a bearing on the second item versus the first item. Anyone have a motion?
Well, you got a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thinking about what you just said, Bill, it maybe the first paragraph, if the second paragraph legally and realistically can be accomplished, the first paragraph, if it were strengthened, some might be a step that could be made, and that it's got the sentence in there that urges registrants to select subconsultants on the basis of qualifications. Maybe it urges government and public officials to have subconsultants listed on the qualifications-based proposals that they get from their prime designers. Because that may be really where the rubber hits the road, is where
most of the RFPs that we do, you have the consultants all listed on there.
I agree, and maybe maybe that sentence there would be something that affirms what people are doing, and also is something there for the entities that aren't doing that.
Word that again, public agencies are encouraged to, list sub-consultants?
They're encouraged to require that their requests for qualifications-based proposals list the sub-consultants.
Okay with that? Maybe the first paragraph with that additional sentence added?
I'm not sure that, Ricky, I'm pondering this, because I'm not sure that captures everything that we're talking about. It really doesn't, I don't think. And as we know, when those big RFPs come out, when you're putting all of the sub-consultants under there, it's perhaps the smaller projects where someone is selected not by QBS and then adds a sub-consultant after the fact.
I agree.
I really don't see it catching being in public's best interest to allow a go-around to the spirit of the law. And I think that's what number 1 does.
That's right. That's right.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not.
I go back to some of these questions in the Flexibility Act. Does the rule make it better to do business in Tennessee? Does the rule make it
respond to that?
We'll repeat one thing. If the second part was approved, then the state itself would have to do some action and reconsider how they require things to be done. And I don't know if that goes to A&Es, that's who we're dealing with, but how far reaching that
I still come down on number one, and maybe with the modifications. And again, I just think that when a team is selected, though, I think it's incumbent that that team be kept together. I just think that's that's important, because I believe then in some ways you may be making a false representation to your client, who is a public agency, because you may have somebody on that team that's got a special, some kind of something that was the tipping factor for you receiving that project. So I think that to me is important. However, when you look at the, if you're the prime on something and there's no listed subconsultants, but you know you've got to go get subconsultants later on, the contractually, I don't know that it becomes almost, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to reach beyond the prime contract and go to a subconsultant contract that you have nested with somebody else. And that kind of answers that question, is then that becomes legally a lot more burdensome on your client if that should come up, that they have to go to a subconsultant, because then they kind of have to unwind the ball a little bit. And I'm not sure that is something that we want to get into the business of doing. But I mean, I understand, Laura and Ricky, I understand your all's points exactly, but I think it's incumbent on us as professionals to police our own, to make sure that we have some procedure in place to select, to bring qualified people to the table, even if it's qualified people to get pricing from. One of the things that always frustrates me on some of those, and I'll speak from the surveying side, is we will be asked to do surveying services, and it's not an apples to apples. You know, they'll send it to somebody that's got a horse in the chain, and then they'll send it to somebody else that's got I think it's incumbent on us as professionals to get the people together and at least have a comparison of apples to apples, so that if they're selecting a mechanical, you're at least selecting it with comparably qualified people, and you're not just getting some person that's just barely able to do the project. So because we are bringing that expertise, supposedly that expertise, to our public client, that we can put this team together with, because we're saying that we're qualified to begin with. We're saying that we're qualified enough to do the project, which means putting together a qualified team. So I just don't know that we can go to number two. I think we can encourage some of the things that number two says. I think we can encourage our professions to do the things that number two says, but I don't know that we can come out and mandate number two. I'm not sure that we can do that.
Question for Oops. Telling me to stop talking. I have a question for Robert. You can't see us doing it because of legal issues, or because it's not in the spirit of the law?
No,
I'm not understanding.
One of the things that we've discussed in this whole process is we want to make sure that the people that we're serving, that we're protecting the safety, health, and welfare of the people that we're serving. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that the delivery system that we're giving them is smooth, easy. We take the kinks out of it. They don't have to worry about legacy costs. They don't have to worry about the uh-ohs that come about by selecting unqualified people. And I just think adding an additional potential contractual layer is something that we're introducing for public clients, a potential other step that they may have to go through of complication. I mean, because then you have to go to a subconsultant that was selected by your prime consultant that may not be qualified, but you have to have your client make that determination, and that your client has to be the one prosecuting that. And I don't think that's in the spirit of the QBS law either, where we're trying to make things easier or more effective or higher quality or whatever the word is for our public clients, our public governments and whatnot. So that's my, I mean, we're adding an extra difficulty factor potentially. And I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I mean, potentially we are.
I see your point, but I still say it doesn't, I don't like the fact that the workaround is being used.
But the people that are jeopardizing are our own profession. It's not the TDOT that's saying, I should be speaking in the mic, I'm sorry. I'll use TDOT as an example. It's not TDOT that's doing that. We're doing it ourselves because we're not bringing qualified people to the table, because they're trusting that we know what we're doing to select the correct subconsultants for a project, even to bring those correct subconsultants to a pricing arrangement if we have to. So I think we're doing it to ourselves more than anything.
Somebody make a motion.
Yeah, which one you want?
I mean, make one and we'll vote it up or down. I mean, go ahead. No. I'm listening to both of these people, and I'm agreeing with both of them, but we need.
Can we request an AG?
I'll do this. Shoot. I'll mess it up, but I'll do it. I make a motion that we use the first statement with the modification I think that Ricky mentioned, and that we also encourage our registrants that in the event that a team is selected by the public entity, that team remains intact throughout the project if, I don't say if at all possible, but barring unforeseen circumstances, I want them going out of business, or I think that's trying to pull one over on somebody. If you go show somebody a Cadillac and then you're trying to swap Yugos in at the end of the thing, I think that's not a good way to do it. That will be my motion.
Do I have a second?
So moved.
Do I have any further discussion?
Just one comment. I think it helps support. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Just one comment. If you do any work with the University of Tennessee, you send your team in on your initial application to do that work. And the only way you can change your team is if you have the unforeseen circumstance that Mr. Campbell just mentioned, if they go out of business or something like that. So, they require you to do that already. So it's a good practice, and we should encourage it. I'm just endorsing the motion.
I think we just need to carefully look at this addition, because I do think that what we ought to urge is that the public officials require a listing of the sub-consultants when the selection is made. I'm a little uncomfortable with the language, Robert, you suggested in requiring them to keep the team together, because a prime designer ought to be afforded the same flexibility that if they go to negotiate with the designer that they have selected and they can't work out a deal, they ought to be able to go to number two as well. I mean, I think that ought to work the same way, and I just think it ought to take some careful language to go after what you're talking about, but to not act like you can't proceed in the way that we all think is the correct way. QBS.
But as a owner who might be a local government, if you've gone through a QBS procedure, you have the right to expect that subconsult to be on that team, because if that may have made another team win So I think if we've had a sub-consultant fall off a team, then they can only proceed if the owner approves it. That's how we've done that. Now, after you've already executed a contract, it might be, I'm not sure what the answer to that would be, but before you execute a contract, the owner would have the right to expect the team that they saw the qualifications for to be listed in the contract.
Any further discussion? Yes, sir, Frank.
One other, I guess, strange thing would be my case, which my firm's an A&E firm. And so we have civil, structural, so forth on staff. And would that mean that we would have to go out and get proposals from other? I mean, I just.
For the qualified.
Hopefully they're qualified.
I don't think number one says that.
I don't either.
I mean, I don't think number one would make you go out and get proposals. I think it's just saying that it doesn't control the sub-consultant level.
So it's saying if you put out proposals, you have to do it in this manner, but you don't have to put the proposal out.
And what's yours?
What I'm saying is, if you're getting sub-consultant proposals, then you need to do it in a certain way. Paraphrasing this. But you don't have to go get proposals from sub-consultants. You don't have to, right? Yeah, you won't. Even you can select a professional. You don't even really have to put out the RFP unless, the local government's requiring you to. You can turn around and hire whoever you want. An argument against any of this. I'm just saying. Strange.
Just have one more question, especially Robert. What if the situation, which is frequent, where the teams do not include all the sub-consultants when all of the consultants are not required to be put on there for selection, and then after selection, that team goes out to choose an additional sub-consultants, and frequently that occurs for geotechnical and other areas. So what happens in that instance?
Well, I think in that instance, we're back to the same thing we're talking about now is, I think, let me clarify, if you've advertised your team, and I still think unforeseen circumstances may mean that you can't negotiate your price with them, then I think you keep that. There are other people that you have to get that are not part of your team. You have to go get an auxiliary or some other sub-consultant. Then I think it's still incumbent on you as a design professional to select people that are qualified and that are similarly qualified to do that project to bring them back. But again, I think that's incumbent on the design professional. I don't see that as another burden to put on the client. I mean, if Steve Knoxville selects me for something and says, well, you go get somebody to do a traffic study as part of your team, and it's not part of the original thing, then I think I ought to pick firms that have experience in that there's 2 or 3 firms that are similar, but that ought to be on me. It shouldn't be on the city of Knoxville to say, you're required to do this, this, and this, because I think that just puts another burden on the owner that we as design professionals should be able to do.
But you're agreeing that that should be a QBS process?
Depending on how you define some sort of QBS. I don't know exactly what. Again, I just mentioned before, my QBS is I think I know who I know those similarly qualified firms because I'm in the industry, and that's how I pick them based on qualifications. But I don't send out a request for proposals. I don't interview.
Sure.
I just go, you know what? firm 1, 2, 3, yeah, they're about the same. I've worked with this one on this project, this one on this one. They're all about to do that. They've done this, and so I may call up firm number 1 and say, here's my budget. Does that sound about right? Here's the scope, what we're looking at, and go on from there.
Or you may sole source it. You may go directly to one.
That's right.
Exactly, which would be in keeping, I'm saying,
well, with the
with the spirit of the law.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
But what I think I heard Frank say is what's occurring under the spirit of that, and which fits with number 1, is the owner saying, go out, get bids for that after the fact. And there are entities, there are municipalities, there are government that are doing that. And that would be still allowed under 1, even I think with Ricky's wording, or the wording that you've included.
First of all, I don't think I understand the motion because it included like in what Ricky said and.
Okay. I didn't understand it either.
Well.
I'll try to restate
So
it.
I'm not gonna vote on a motion that I don't really understand the wording. This is too big a deal. So if we're gonna make a change, my suggestion at least, without, unless it's just incumbent that we have an answer right this very minute, I'm gonna suggest that we just eliminate this process right now and get a group to write some language that maybe it's a little different or changes this or ever how you want to do it, and we start over again with this discussion, because we just continue to layer upon layer upon layer. And number one, to me, it almost is like we don't think any of these government entities have any sense at all about how to do business. So we're going to tell them how they're going to do their business. And I think there's a point somewhere where we say the government has to do the QBS, which is fine, but they contract with an architectural or an engineering firm. You do this other, they're going to be signing 5 contracts, 6 contracts, 7 contracts, and they're going to be managing 7 or 8. What they want to manage is 1. That's the architectural engineering firm that they signed a contract with, and it's up to that architectural or engineering firm to manage those subs. Now, if they want to ask for a list of your team, great. If they don't want to ask for a list of your team, that's their business. But I think if we're going to get into this, then we either need to start over, or maybe 1 is okay the way it is, because it's pretty general. If we have to answer this question right this minute. But I think the answer to the question is, does TCA 124107A and the rule hire sub-consultants? And I think the answer to that, in my opinion, and I'm not an attorney, but I think the answer, if you ask an attorney or the attorney general, he'd probably say no, it doesn't. So I don't think you can get to 2, in my opinion. If we want to do 1, okay, but if not, if we're going to try to get into strengthening this, or then let's rewrite it and talk about it at the next meeting.
It's a question that we've been receiving for months now, and we keep deferring. Helpful to have at least some tentative answer, if nothing else, today.
Could you read out what you wrote down that was Ricky's?
Okay, here's what I've got. Well, the language is previously included here. And then with the addition, public agencies are encouraged to require that responses to requests include a listing of sub-consultants. Does that capture what you were going for? And that also with Robert's addition, that in the event a team is selected by a public entity, the team should remain together for the duration of the project, barring unforeseen circumstances. Is that about what you said? Tried to capture it all, but.
I think, at the end of the day, I think the answer is no. That's my opinion. That's my opinion. The answer is no. However, in saying that it's no, I would also like to have a couple of encouraging or I don't know if qualifying statements, that's not the right word, but something in there that says we need to make sure that the team is kept together, because that's what it's been based on, and you select qualified people as sub-consultants as the prime. That's the two things that I would think that we would all want to get to at some point. Because if you're being asked for geotechnical services, you don't want to have to, you want to compete in similar waters that you're in. You don't want to have to compete against somebody that's I think it's incumbent on, that's the only thing I was trying to add is something to that. But I think at the end of the day, the answer to me is no. You don't have to.
Could we put in there that legally it's no, and that, but that they are encouraged?
No, it says,
Yeah.
however, in keeping with the spirit of the law, the board urges registrants to select sub-consultants on the basis of their. That's in that first paragraph. You are encouraging them.
I'd like to call for the question.
Okay, any further discussion has been cut off, so, as stated in the motion, all in favor, say aye.
I'm not sure what the motion is.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't vote on it, and calling for the question doesn't cut off debate. Now, if you want to move the previous question, vote, then you cut off debate.
Let me do this. If I don't know who seconded, but I would ask that the motion be taken off the table and we vote on the original language.
I seconded the motion, and I will support that.
So we're now voting on the language that is stated in number 1.
That's my motion. My motion is that we vote, I've lost it in here.
Yeah, right here.
I make a motion that we vote that on the answer to number 18, that TCA 1240107A applies only to contracts between state or local government agency and an architect, engineer, landscape architect. If a registrant is not entering into a contract with a government entity, then they may include a fee in their proposal for a public project. However, in keeping with the spirit of the law, the board urges registrants to select sub-consultants on the basis of their qualifications.
And I second.
I have one question.
Okay.
To make this clear to whoever reads this, would it be good to put the word no period before TCA 12-?
I think so.
I would amend my motion to have the word no in front of TCA squiggly line 12-4-107A.
Oh, okay.
You agree with that?
Yeah. I support that amendment.
Okay. Now, on the amended motion, any other discussion? All in favor of the amended motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries as amended. Is that it for that?
Yeah, that's it for that one question. Also, I just wanted to, I'm not going to burden you more. Based on the discussion earlier when Mr. Garst was present, I'm assuming that your position regarding submitting a sealed envelope has not changed, right? Because that's number 10. The answer was no. Registrants may only state compensation to a prospective client in direct negotiation following selection based on qualifications. That's still the general. I want to make sure that had not changed any. Okay. And as far as publishing all of these questions, I mean, are you okay with publishing them in their amended form? Because some of these we struck the word design because it was felt that may be too narrow. Are you okay with maybe publishing these in our next newsletter? Some of them we've already published, but we've revised them somewhat since.
Let's keep it to ourselves.
Yeah, we don't want to keep it to our.
Yeah,
Publish
will
them
they
to
be
educate.
Posted on the website as well? So that
Right, we can publish
link
them
to 'em?
separately as well, yeah. Okay. And we do have another question, actually. It's not one of our FAQs. The email from David Smith I received last month. He writes, as a follow-up to our conversation, I am requesting an interpretation clarification of, I think he's referring to our rule on QBS, as it relates to a licensed professional working as a construction manager contractor under contract with a public entity. Historically, there are portions of our work that are either performance-based specifications, pre-engineered metal buildings, curtain wall systems, skylights, etc., or means and methods type work, temporary bank shoring, formwork, etc., that require professional design services for proprietary systems or products. There are several points that I would like to get clarified. 1, does this rule preclude public entities from using performance-based specifications that require sealed documents as part of the deliverable? I guess we could do these one at a time if you.
Any discussion?
Let me say that I am
Bill, I've worked with them 20 years, so I need to exclude myself also.
I have a quorum, you just wouldn't have the, be able to. Okay. Discussion?
I'd like to say that's a good question.
It is. It is.
I know we run into that in specifications for proprietary, semi-proprietary things like if you're using metal building system, you require how you could actually police that. Separate sub-bids of anything that requires a separate seal. So could be looked at that way. So number one. I don't know the legal end of that either.
I just, it's kind of a confusing question. Number one, does this rule preclude public entities from using performance-based specifications that required sealed documents as part of the deliverable? I mean, if it's required by the fire marshal or the entities, yeah. Seal on the documents, it's pretty clear in statutes.
Bidding process, like if you're bidding a heating and air unit and you've got a sealed bid, that, and it's a performance-based.
This is about a bid.
Well, but they may
It
require
doesn't
the
say that.
engineer to, initiate it. So, that's based on.
That's a product issue. That's not a professional seal issue.
Well, it says a performance-based specification, so.
In a 10-ton
yeah.
unit that's a 16
I'm just- that
SEER.
was just
I know,
my
I'm just,
example,
that's
you
what
know.
I'm saying. That, that's why I'm not really understanding the comment. So,
Knowing Knox County and knowing this is where they do a lot of their work, being that process throughout the years, I can't say what I want to say because it would influence someone, right? Okay, then I won't say anything else.
I didn't interpret it as meaning a product. I interpreted it as meaning more what Frank said. And where we run into it is for certain seismic restraint design, we can't design it because it all depends on whether the thing is here are here, and design documents don't restrict it that tightly. So we require performance, performance spec type design to be done by the contractor, and that seismic constraint has to be stamped by a PE to get through the code process. And I think that's what's being talked about here in the metal building being similar to that. I don't think that we should change the way that's happening. I guess the concern is there's a potential for abuse where they could say, well, we're gonna have a performance-based theater building designed, with all the systems in it. But maybe that's something that we don't address unless we see that problem happening. We don't try to fix a problem that doesn't exist. So when I read this, the way I interpret what they're talking about, I don't think that we don't need to inject some requirement that they get qualifications bids. Because I don't know that legally that you can do that.
I'll go back to, I think, what everybody else has said, so it's probably, but I think that anything that impacts the public health, safety, and welfare needs a stamp or seal unless it's excluded in our laws and rules based on square footage or stories or whatever. EMC GC, obviously they're kind of like a project manager, for lack of a better word, but they're pulling together the team. But again, I think if it's anything, it's got public monies involved and public funding. To me, they need to go through the similar process that the public entity's doing, because that's the intent, from what I understand of the Brooks Act, is that because it's got public funding, you have to go through that process. So I would say that it still applies to them for professional services, but not necessarily for installation services. So that's.
Well, Robert, knowing that, how would we do design build? The Johnson Gallion does a lot of that, and it's coming for roads and bridges. You know that.
Yeah,
and
right.
Contractors leading it.
We did have one issue with, I think it was canceled, but the city did a design build for the replacement of the ice rink in the Coliseum. But I wasn't sure we were doing it right, because, a design build is primarily the general contractor puts the team together and submits a total bid. There's nothing about the qualifications. I was on the committee, and I was looking at whether I thought the registrants could do the work or not, but there wasn't any ranking. I really think that's what David's getting at. Does our law even address design build and how
We have a policy on design build, but it's more in regard to whether the contractors would have to file a firm disclosure form or not. It doesn't really address this issue.
Alternative delivery system for the state of Tennessee, which isn't.
Can I make a suggestion then? I mean, I think there's some confusion or whatever it is. I think we'll probably add this as a topic for our retreat, because what you just said, kind of, if we've got that's the only policy we've got on alternative delivery methods, we might want to go revisit that for the entirety of alternative, because you're right, design build is one that's there. The CMGC, CG, whatever that's called, is certainly something that people are pursuing more and more. And, I don't know if there's an issue. I don't know the entirety of it. So it's probably something, John, if we've got an opportunity to do that, we ought to try to have that, and maybe have somebody from the industry that understands the different delivery methods. If we find those people or persons. Yeah, this person, Johnson Gallion, may be a great person to come and discuss with us what they do differently to see how that works, because I don't know. I mean, I just don't know that, I know a little bit about the 2 or 3 of them, but I'm not, I don't know the procedure that you go through is what I'm saying.
Common in the private sector.
I'm sure, yeah.
You want to do it in October or do it in August just at the next meeting? I mean, coming to Nashville would be a little easier for me.
Whichever's fine with me. I mean, that August
Okay.
would be fine. I just think we as a board,
Just
I know
invite
me
him to
personally need
come.
more information, and
Okay.
I know that it's, you know, we may only be talking about 10% of the projects or 5%, or I don't know how many we're talking about from state standpoint, but it's probably significant enough that they could, if we don't understand it, it could put the public at risk.
It's going to increase.
Yeah.
So we're going to put off this letter and ask them to maybe present some of their information to us at the August meeting. Now we're into the elections.
Yes, sir.
Officer elections. Wilson, you were
The
the,
nominating committee reported at the last, at our April meeting, our nominations, our recommendations are Rick Thompson for chair, Robert Campbell for vice chair, and Susan Ballard for secretary. Recommendation, which I think serves as a motion.
motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? Any other offers?
Can we vote for ourselves?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I
Yeah,
think we
you
should
are-
thank Mr. Lockwood for his service.
And I'm going.
Yes,
I-
yeah.
Y'all got rid of me.
Mr.
They got rid
Thompson.
of me.
You did a wonderful job this year. Kept most of us in
Most
check.
of
With a couple of people missing today, I'm just kidding.
Is that it?
Got legislative proposals.
Okay.
Yeah, I think these last 3 items we can get through fairly quickly, hopefully. Page 94 or thereabouts on your iPads. These are 3 proposals. These are just carried over from last year that we're going to present to the powers that be in our department to potentially include in the governor's legislative package next year. They're asking for this earlier and earlier each year, it seems like, so that's why we're trying to get ahead of the game a little bit and already have these lined up to present. The first, and most of you have seen these before, the first is amending our statute relative to the approval process for engineering exam candidates to allow us to follow the automatic method for fundamentals of engineering exam candidates, where they can just go straight to NCEES, register and pay for their exam, and then after they pass the exam, they would apply to us for their certificate. Right now, they have to apply to us for approval to sit for the exam, which kind of just makes it a little overly complicated. It would be easier if they would take the test after they pass, then they would apply to us for their certification. So that's a process that's been adopted by a majority of states. So we're going to have some statutory changes, though, in order to follow that procedure in Tennessee. The second is amending TCA Section 622308 regarding the denial, suspension, or revocation of a license, to add a specific reference to felony convictions. Right now, the statute doesn't specifically mention felony convictions. It's covered by good conduct and repute, and it's in our misconduct rule, but Rob has recommended that it be added to our statute as well, just to make it clearer, I suppose. And also, we're required to immediately notify the Secretary of State, county, town, and city clerks of revocations and suspensions, or of the reissuance of a revoked certificate of registration, which we feel is overly burdensome to immediately notify. I mean, how do you define immediately? So, and it just, with the technology at our disposal, it doesn't, all that information's readily available on our website, and it's published in our newsletters and so forth. We don't feel that that's really necessary, or it could be amended to where it's less burdensome. And finally, amending 62-504 and 804 relative to retention of credit for any parts of the architect and landscape architect registration exams passed. Right now, they retain credit for any parts of the exam passed indefinitely, and this would remove that. That's that language where they would retain credit in accordance with the policies established by NCARB and CLARB. So those are our recommendations, and all of these I think the board has approved in the past, but do they need to take a motion on these, Rob?
Any comments? Do I get a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Please say aye for approval.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you.
Now, as usual, the likelihood of these getting into the governor's package is very minimal, but we'll submit them nonetheless, and hopefully we'll be surprised.
Meeting agenda?
Well, we got revisions to grant guidelines next, immediately following. The only change is removing the International Academy of Design and Technology in Nashville from the list of CETA accredited programs because they are defunct, right, Susan?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
We do have ETSU that's up for accreditation, so we might want to check with them.
Which school?
ETSU.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You said within
Interesting.
2 years, and I believe it's
Right.
20, yeah,
Okay.
2016 is what I heard. So we
Oh.
need to check with them.
Okay, very good.
Motion on that?
Yes.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Okay, and the last item is the October meeting agenda, a draft, of course. We are meeting with the deans at this particular meeting at Montgomery Bell. Wednesday, of course, we'll have committee meetings, as we usually do for the different professions. Then Thursday morning typically would be our meeting with the educators. In the past several meetings we've had, we've invited not only the engineering deans, which we've met with for many years, but also the deans, educators of architecture, landscape architecture, and interior design. Do you want to continue that? Go ahead and, okay, just continue, okay. I didn't want to assume, wanted to get your input on that. Okay, so we will invite all of them to attend. And in regard to that meeting, I mean, especially for the engineers, I mean, you could probably talk for that whole time, just talking, but do you want to try to invite a speaker perhaps, or have any kind of presentation prepared for the breakout sessions? Of course, we had Davey McDowell from NCAAS came last time in Fall Creek Falls and did a presentation on the upcoming, at that time, computerization of the FE exam. It's still on the agenda to give an update on computer-based testing, but
Sounds like we're gonna have enough stuff, I think, to talk about. I don't know if we need anybody else in there with us. Do you?
you would have enough to talk about?
I think we'll still have this indefinite, whatever we just talked about. Design, build, and some other things. I bet we'll still bleed over into this. I don't think.
I'm talking about the meeting with the deans,
Oh,
the educators, yeah. I know last time we had plenty of items for y'all to talk about. And Hal will be at the meetings.
I will be at the meeting, so I think we're fine.
Yeah, okay. I think Philip, I'm sorry? Oh. It's the 9th. I think I may have said that it was the 10th through the
October
12th
9th.
earlier, but it's actually the 8th through the 10th.
October 9th.
Yeah. October. Philip had maybe mentioned having somebody from ABET come to talk about accreditation, or maybe somebody from NCAAS to talk about using the FE as an outcomes assessment tool. Both of which, we've had individuals from both organizations come and speak on those topics in the past. As far as ABET, I don't know what kind of travel budget they have, if they would even be able to accommodate us. NCAAS might. But I know last time you were kind of short on time to just discuss the issues with the dean, so, okay. We'll leave it as is. We are going to have box lunches provided, as we did at Fall Creek Falls. You don't like box lunches, right? Okay. It'll be good, I'm sure. Then we have the Law and Rules Policies Committee, grants, finance, publications, licensure outreach, Education Committee. And then I've got a slot there. I'm not sure what to put there. I mean, we've done board member training in the past. We could put strategic planning there, but there hasn't been a lot of traction with that. So, if you want that to die, I'm okay with that. I mean, it's not going to hurt my feelings any. Or I had thought, too, this kind of ties in, though, with, I guess, the Law and Rules Policies Committee, we haven't done this in a long time, maybe ever, do a comparison of our law and rules with the model laws and rules of the different associations that we're members of, NCARB's model rules and NCAAS, do a thorough comparison. That might be something that would be
Why don't you leave that
beneficial.
open, and between now and then, there may be some things come up that you want to.
Okay. Okay. Rulemaking hearing. Now, the rulemaking hearing will be moved to Friday morning, the 10th. That's where we'll place that, because that's when we have the actual board meeting. And that's pretty much the same as always. We have the committee reports. And for the October meeting, I wanted to present it to you now. It seems kind of far in advance, but I'm going to be sending out invitations to the deans in the next few weeks, so I wanted to
Need a
at least
motion?
get the agenda down for that meeting.
Do we need a motion for this?
No, you don't.
Okay.
No, it's just for discussion.
All right, is there anything else?
Got one thing. I just got a text back that ETSU is up for accreditation in 2015.
Oh, really?
So,
15, okay, so they'll be eligible for grant funds. So do we need to, I don't know if
Add
we
them
need
to
to
the
add
list.
them to the guidelines?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think in the past, that applied to University of Memphis. One time before they were fully accredited, we provided them with grant funds, and they were added to, I think, the paragraph right above submission of proposals in the policy, the guidelines, where it says architecture, engineering, landscape architecture, and interior design programs at colleges and universities that are within 2 academic years of receiving accreditation are also eligible for grant funds. I don't know that we really need to amend it to add ETSU there. I think before we actually said, like, such as the architecture program at the University of Memphis, but I think the guidelines already give us authority with that paragraph to provide grants to ETSU. So I think we're okay.
I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, let's all go.
All right. Oh, Mr. Lockwood, you'll have to sign the mutual recognition agreement.
Got it printed out?
Well, it's up in my office, so
Okay.
we can go up there and get it. Yes, the appeasement, yes.
Thank you, Bill. Good job. Yeah.
I had a question for maybe Mr. Thompson here. I had a